In some corners of the world, the landscape itself becomes a warning. Dense forests whisper with unseen movement, mountains rise with sharp, unwelcoming edges, and deserts stretch endlessly under skies that seem to watch. In these places, even the most experienced search teams hesitate, leaving the missing unclaimed and the terrain uncharted. The danger is not always visible. It lies in radiation-soaked trees, treacherous ice fields, shifting sands, and the silent weight of isolation, creating spaces where human presence feels fragile and fleeting. As you step into these zones, the air grows heavy with tension, and the familiar rules of safety and navigation lose their certainty. You will move through forests twisted by catastrophe, cross lava-scarred fields, and trace the hidden paths of the vanished. Every location holds its own enigma, and every discovery exposes a world that resists human understanding, leaving questions that linger long after you leave. The Halls Creek Range, Australia. The northern interior of Western Australia stretches for thousands of kilometres without towns, fences or reliable roads, a landscape where distance is measured less in maps than in survival margins. Heat dominates the daylight hours, while nights fall abruptly. Without relief, the ground itself alternates between red stone, spinifex grass, and shallow gullies that appear harmless until they funnel floodwater without warning. It is within this immense isolation that the Halls Creek Range rises in broken ridges and low escarpments, a place that rarely appears in headlines, yet has become quietly significant to those tasked with finding the lost. For Australian search teams, this is one of the regions where rescues are sometimes refused or abruptly halted, not because people do not go missing, but because the terrain behaves in ways that defy ordinary recovery logic. The Halls Creek Range lies near the edge of the Great Sandy Desert, east of the Kimberley Plateau, in country shaped by ancient erosion rather than dramatic elevation. From the air, it appears readable, even navigable, with visible ridgelines and dry creek beds offering natural pathways. On the ground, those same features fragment into countless false leads, where animal tracks intersect human footprints and then dissolve into stone. Search teams familiar with arid environments expect traces to linger, especially in softer sand, yet reports from this area consistently describe tracks that end abruptly without disturbance beyond them. These are not washed away by rain or windstorms, but simply stop, leaving no obvious point of departure. Local police reports and bush search guidelines classify much of the range as a limited recovery zone, a designation used sparingly in Australia. The label does not suggest supernatural danger, but rather an accumulation of risk factors that make further searching statistically futile or hazardous to rescuers themselves. Temperatures regularly exceed 40 degrees Celsius, aircraft visibility can shift suddenly with dust, and radio communication is unreliable due to the terrain's low but jagged profiles. Still, veteran search coordinators have privately noted that environmental hazards alone do not explain why individuals familiar with bush travel have vanished here without leaving recoverable evidence. One of the enduring difficulties in the Halls Creek Range is orientation. The region lacks dominant landmarks, and magnetic interference caused by iron-rich rock formations has been documented by geological surveys. While the interference is minor and usually inconsequential, it becomes relevant when combined with fatigue, dehydration, and prolonged exposure. Searchers recount moments when compass bearings drifted subtly over short distances, enough to skew grid patterns without immediately alerting experienced navigators. When a missing person's last known direction is already uncertain, these small deviations compound quickly, expanding the search area beyond what teams can realistically cover. Historical context deepens the unease surrounding the range. The Kimberley region has long been associated with vanished prospectors and failed expeditions dating back to the late 19th century, when gold rush routes passed near Halls Creek. Archival records describe men who left camps to scout nearby ridges and never returned, despite organised searches conducted by mounted parties who were familiar with the land. While many of these losses were attributed to heat or miscalculation, chronial notes from the era often mention the absence of remains or equipment, an unusual outcome in terrain where even bones tend to persist. Modern cases follow a similar pattern. When individuals are reported missing, search aircraft frequently identify objects or disturbances that appear promising from above, only for ground teams to find nothing upon arrival. These false positives are not mirages, but real visual cues that seem to rearrange themselves when approached. Rescue coordinators have documented repeated instances of radioed confirmations that later proved impossible to reconcile with GPS logs, as if the same location had been identified more than once but never physically reached. Such discrepancies, while not officially categorized as anomalies, contribute to decisions to limit or withdraw operations. Another complicating factor is the way sound behaves in the range. Acoustic studies conducted for environmental monitoring have shown that wind moving through the ridges can carry noises laterally for long distances, creating the impression of proximity where none exists. Searchers have followed shouted calls or radio pings only to discover they were being redirected along natural corridors that bent sound unpredictably. In a rescue scenario, this leads to dangerous feedback loops, where teams chase auditory signals that never converge on a source, draining time, water, and daylight. Indigenous knowledge of the region adds a layer of restraint rather than explanation. Traditional custodians have long identified certain parts of the range as areas where travel should be minimal and purposeful, not casual. While these perspectives are cultural rather than operational, search planners in northern Australia increasingly acknowledge them when assessing risk. Elders have described places where people become confused without injury, or where movement feels subtly resisted, descriptions that align uncomfortably well with modern reports of disorientation among trained personnel. As a result, search and rescue doctrine in the Halls Creek Range prioritizes containment over pursuit. Teams are instructed to establish perimeter sweeps and aerial monitoring rather than deep penetration into zones where previous searches produced no recoveries. This approach is not widely publicized, partly to avoid discouraging legitimate travel, and partly because there is no clear incident that marks the policy's beginning. Instead, it emerged gradually, shaped by after-action reports that ended with the same unresolved conclusion: no trace, no recovery, no further safe options. Equipment logs from past operations reveal another subtle pattern. GPS units and satellite phones rarely fail outright, but their recorded paths sometimes show irregular loops or compressions that do not match the physical time spent moving. Investigators reviewing these logs have attributed the discrepancies to human error or signal bounce, explanations that are technically sound yet unsatisfying when they occur repeatedly in the same narrow corridors of terrain. Over time, such patterns erode confidence in both the tools and the assumptions that guide their use. Despite these concerns, the Halls Creek Range is not officially closed, nor is it marked as forbidden. People continue to pass through it, often without incident, reinforcing the difficulty of predicting who will return and who will not. The mystery lies not in constant danger but in selective absence, in the way the land appears indifferent until, without warning, it is not. For those tasked with rescue, the refusal to continue searching is not an admission of defeat, but a recognition that some landscapes do not yield answers simply because they are asked to. And long after the last aircraft turns back and the search grids are folded away, the range remains unchanged, holding its ridges and silence as if nothing ever entered them at all. Mount Asgard's North Face, Canada. The first thing climbers notice is not distance or isolation, but the way Mount Asgard's North Face rises so abruptly that it seems to interrupt the sky itself. On Baffin Island in Nunavut, the mountain stands apart from the surrounding Arctic valleys, its twin granite towers visible from across the glacial corridor of Auyuittuq National Park. The North Face, facing into prevailing winds and prolonged shadow, has long been regarded as the most severe aspect of the mountain. Search teams operating in the region acknowledge it quietly as a place where rescue is not guaranteed, not because people rarely attempt it, but because once something goes wrong on that wall, the landscape allows very little room for retrieval. Seen from the glacier below, the North Face forms a near-vertical barrier of granite and ice that offers no transitional slope, only immediate commitment. Rising roughly a kilometre from base to summit, the face is composed of sheer rock sections, interrupted by hanging ice fields and narrow couloirs that funnel debris straight downward. There are no benches or broad ledges where a climber can rest, or where rescuers might safely establish a staging area. Any object dislodged above accelerates directly along the route of ascent, turning the face itself into a continuous fall line that compounds risk for anyone below. For search and rescue coordinators in Nunavut, This wall represents a threshold beyond which standard recovery assumptions no longer apply. Helicopter operations are severely constrained by cold air drainage along the face, which creates unstable turbulence near the rock. Fixed-wing aircraft can observe but cannot deploy personnel with precision. Ground teams approaching from the glacier must contend with crevasses, seasonal ice movement, and exposure that increases with every step toward the wall. These factors mean that any rescue attempt must be rapid and decisive, and often the assessment is made that no such window exists. When climbers fail to return from the north face, investigators expect certain patterns to emerge, yet those patterns have repeatedly failed to materialize. In steep alpine terrain, accidents usually produce clear indicators such as damaged rope, disturbed snow, or visible fall paths traced by debris. On Mount Asgard, reports instead describe routes that simply go silent, with no evidence of descent, collapse, or retreat. This absence leaves no clear starting point for reconstruction, forcing search planners to work without the anchors of sequence or location that typically guide recovery efforts. Unlike forested or desert environments, steep Arctic faces typically concentrate evidence downward, making a complete absence difficult to explain. Gravity should carry bodies and equipment toward the glacier, where accumulation zones form naturally at the base of the wall. Snowfall during climbing season is generally insufficient to bury large objects quickly, and exposed rock limits the formation of deep concealment. Yet repeated ground searches below the north face have failed to reveal debris fields or impact zones consistent with known routes, leaving only clean ice and unmarked stone. Aerial search conditions here are often ideal by polar standards, with long daylight hours and sharply defined terrain that should reveal disturbance. During the Arctic summer, extended visibility eliminates the deep shadowing that complicates mountain searches elsewhere, and contrast between climbers' ice and granite is unusually high. From the air, even small changes in the surface are typically easy to detect. Despite this advantage, flyovers of the North Face have repeatedly produced no definitive signs of movement or interruption, reinforcing the conclusion that nothing recoverable remains within visible reach. On the wall itself, searchers describe an experience defined by stillness, where movement is slow and the surrounding space feels emptied of reference. The vertical scale compresses perspective, making distances difficult to judge and progress hard to measure. Sound dissipates quickly, and the cold suppresses vibration, creating an environment where even deliberate actions feel muted. Every anchor placement demands time, and every pause increases exposure to naturally shedding ice, released by subtle temperature shifts, forcing teams to weigh each additional meter against the growing likelihood of becoming stranded themselves. The geology of Mount Asgard adds another layer of resistance, as its ancient granite sheds little and preserves no recent narrative of passage. Composed of Precambrian rock that has changed little over geological time, the face does not scar easily, nor does it record impact in ways visible from a distance. Unlike softer stone that fractures or discolors, this surface remains visually unchanged after climbers pass through it. For investigators, the mountain offers no clues, only continuity, erasing the distinction between occupied and untouched space. Decisions to suspend rescue efforts are usually reached early, guided by calculations that prioritize containment over escalation. Coordinators assess weather stability, wall conditions, and aircraft margins, often concluding that continued searching would introduce unacceptable risk without improving recovery odds. These decisions are documented as operational conclusions rather than failures, reflecting an understanding that the environment dictates limits that planning cannot overcome. In this context, refusal becomes an act of restraint grounded in precedent rather than uncertainty. What distinguishes the North Face is not a single incident, but the accumulation of unresolved outcomes that never develop into recoverable scenes. Over time, these cases shape how future emergencies are evaluated, creating informal boundaries that exist beyond official closures or warnings. The mountain's reputation grows quietly through internal reports and procedural briefings, not through stories or speculation, reinforcing its status as a place where disappearance does not require explanation to persist. After operations end, the mountain offers no visual confirmation that anyone was ever partway up its face. Ice reforms, light shifts, and the wall resumes its static appearance within hours, erasing any indication of interruption. For those who have stood below it, scanning for signs that never emerge, the impression remains that the north face does not conceal evidence so much as decline to acknowledge it. On Mount Asgard's north face, the moment search teams stop looking is less a conclusion than an acceptance that the wall does not return what it absorbs, no matter how clearly it is seen. The Darien Gap, Panama, Colombia. Movement through the jungle begins as a series of small decisions that close behind you almost as soon as they are made. In the Darien Gap, where Panama meets Colombia, travellers step into a landscape that offers no continuity of road or village, only dense tropical forest and rivers that shift unpredictably. Search teams have learned that once someone enters certain sectors of this wilderness, the probability of effective recovery diminishes sharply. Unlike more open or vertical terrain, the danger here is cumulative. Every metre forward increases exposure, and the environment itself seems to reclaim tracks almost immediately, leaving little behind for even the most experienced rescuers. The Darien Gap exists not as a single location but as a stretch of land without connecting roads, where the Pan-American Highway simply stops. Over roughly 160 kilometres of terrain, thick rainforest, swamps and river networks fragment any attempt to create continuous access. Maps show only approximate pathways, and official travel routes are limited to infrequent patrol roads or narrow indigenous trails. For search and rescue personnel, this absence of infrastructure is the first obstacle. Aircraft cannot land safely, ground vehicles cannot traverse most sections, and the few rivers navigable by canoe or small boat demand exact knowledge to avoid being swept into unseen rapids. What appears navigable on maps quickly dissolves into wetlands, rivers, and steep forested ridges that absorb effort faster than it can be measured. Soil saturation and seasonal flooding turn firm trails into quagmires, while ridges and slopes covered in dense vegetation slow movement to a crawl. Teams attempting recovery often discover that even careful progression leaves no linear record. Footprints vanish under the next rainfall, branches close back over trails, and animals erase minor disturbances almost instantly. The forest works actively against tracking, and time spent moving deeper into it increases the risk of losing contact with any missing person while simultaneously endangering the rescuers themselves. Navigation inside the gap rarely involves long sight lines, as dense canopy blocks the sky and turns direction into a matter of estimation rather than certainty. Unlike deserts or mountains, there are no distant ridges or clear vantage points to guide orientation. Rivers twist unpredictably, and small tributaries create isolated compartments within the forest that can take hours to cross and even longer to leave behind. Search teams report that compasses often mislead when magnetic anomalies appear near mineral-rich hills, and GPS devices can be unreliable beneath multi-layered foliage, leaving rescuers dependent on judgment in conditions where every error is magnified. From above, the forest presents an unbroken surface that conceals movement, injuries, and signals with equal efficiency. Helicopter and small aircraft flyovers are limited to the narrowest observation corridors, and cloud cover, shifting weather, or dense canopy can render aerial reconnaissance effectively blind. Even when the weather allows clear views, minor ground disturbances are nearly impossible to distinguish from natural forest variation. This invisibility contrasts sharply with alpine or desert terrain, where movement leaves persistent, visible evidence, reinforcing the idea that the jungle itself absorbs activity without revealing its history. Search operations here are shaped as much by human boundaries as by terrain, since large sections of the region remain beyond the reach of formal rescue authority. Non-state actors, narcotics routes, and isolated communities occupy portions of the gap where official teams cannot enter without risk of confrontation. Legal and political constraints, alongside security concerns, mean that even when the path of a missing person is roughly known, rescuers are often limited to observation or containment rather than direct engagement. In this context, refusal is not a failure, but a recognition of limits imposed by human and environmental factors alike. Even brief exposure within the gap introduces biological risks that compound quickly once a person becomes lost or injured. The region is home to high concentrations of tropical diseases, venomous snakes, and biting insects capable of transmitting malaria or other illnesses. Dehydration and heat exhaustion are common threats when carrying gear through swampy terrain, and minor injuries can escalate rapidly in an environment where evacuation is slow or impossible. These biological realities shape every operational decision and help explain why rescue teams often cease attempts before full visual confirmation of the missing person's location is achieved. Communication degrades rapidly in the rainforest, where humidity, foliage and terrain interfere with radio and satellite signals. Attempts to coordinate multiple teams across river crossings and dense vegetation frequently fail, leaving searchers isolated for hours or even days. Even high-frequency radios, which perform adequately in open country, are attenuated by canopy and terrain folds, while GPS trackers can fail to maintain connectivity under sustained foliage cover. The jungle thus creates a form of enforced separation that is difficult to counter, further justifying operational limits on recovery efforts. When searches are suspended, the decision usually follows a quiet accumulation of failed contact attempts rather than a single defining moment. Teams keep logs of attempted coordinates, signal checks and visual sweeps, and when each of these efforts produces inconclusive results, the probability of meaningful recovery drops below practical thresholds. Unlike mountains, where visual evidence may eventually appear, or deserts, where tracks degrade slowly, the forest removes the possibility of a definitive endpoint almost immediately, creating a procedural necessity to halt the search. What distinguishes the Darien Gap is how rarely disappearances resolve into recoverable scenes or confirmed endpoints. Even in cases where hikers or migrants are reported missing near the edge of the forest, recoveries are extremely limited, and survivors often emerge far downstream days later, having navigated unknown paths. For those organising or observing search operations, the pattern is consistent. The jungle preserves very little, and human presence seems to vanish within it almost without a trace, leaving questions unresolved despite all known procedural and technological interventions. After a person passes through an area, vegetation bends back into place, water levels shift, and any sign of passage becomes indistinguishable from the forest itself. No marks remain on trails, no footprints endure through rain-soaked soil, and every minor disruption is absorbed into the continuous ecology of the region. Teams departing the area can only note the absence of evidence, and even repeated sweeps often return the same result: an uninterrupted expanse of living forest that neither confirms nor denies any presence. In the Darien Gap, the refusal to continue searching often arrives long after movement has begun, when there is no longer a clear point from which to turn back. Aokigahara Forest, Japan. Stepping beneath the dense canopy of Aokigahara, the forest seems to swallow sound, turning each footfall into a question of whether it ever happened at all. Visitors and those called to search for missing persons quickly realize that the air itself feels thicker here, weighted with centuries of volcanic soil and dense foliage. For decades, authorities and volunteers have noted that once someone enters certain parts of the forest, conventional search methods lose their efficacy. Every step forward creates subtle shifts in leaves and debris that vanish almost immediately, leaving rescuers uncertain where a person may have moved or whether they have moved at all. Volcanic rock and twisted roots form uneven terrain, slowing every step and leaving searchers to navigate a surface that preserves almost nothing of what has passed over it. The blackened lava fields are interspersed with moss, ferns and jagged rock that conceal holes and crevices capable of catching an unsuspecting foot. Trails exist, but they are narrow and sometimes indistinct, often leading into areas where the undergrowth thickens suddenly. Every attempt to track a missing person must account for these physical obstacles, which can turn simple steps into hours of careful, deliberate movement. Below the surface, the forest conceals a network of small lava caves and hollows formed from centuries-old volcanic activity, many of which are narrow, unstable, and impossible to map fully. Known locally as Hyuga-kutsu, these cavities can extend under thick moss or hidden roots, swallowing sound and creating pockets of near-complete darkness. Search teams report that these spaces can trap clothing, gear, or even a person's footsteps without leaving any trace above ground, and the dense overgrowth obscures entrances entirely. The combination of subterranean voids and irregular surface terrain amplifies the sense that the forest itself can quietly absorb human presence. Light filters in muted streaks through the conifers, casting shadows that shift continuously and making distance, direction, and depth impossible to judge reliably. Even experienced search teams report moments of disorientation where the forest seems to stretch in all directions at once, erasing familiar reference points. Sunlight through the canopy forms patterns that shift as branches sway, producing optical illusions that can mislead rescuers about where paths lead or where a missing person may have gone. This constant alteration of perception contributes to the sense that movement is being absorbed into the forest rather than leaving a trace. The forest imposes a mental weight as much as a physical one, compressing space and blurring the boundaries between path and thicket, edge and interior. Searchers describe the repetitive visual textures of trunks, roots and leaf litter as disorienting over long periods, creating an almost hypnotic effect. Each false path, each concealed depression or mound of moss slows progress and raises the possibility of error. As hours pass, the forest seems to demand careful attention to detail while simultaneously eroding confidence, a paradox that makes even trained teams hesitant to venture too far into uncharted sections. Footprints and personal markers vanish quickly beneath moss, gravel, and leaf litter, erasing the evidence that might guide even the most experienced search teams. Rainfall is frequent and heavy in this region, washing away tracks within hours, while the dense canopy traps moisture and accelerates decomposition. Clothing, small personal items, and other human traces often disappear or are obscured, leaving only the vaguest hints of passage. As a result, even when teams can follow a general route, progress is slow and uncertain, and the probability of locating someone diminishes rapidly with each step taken. Historical and cultural context surrounds every tree and boulder, from signage discouraging entry to documented awareness of the forest's long-standing association with human absence. Aokigahara has been recognised for centuries as a site linked with mortality and isolation, and local authorities have implemented measures to discourage certain activities within its bounds. This history shapes search operations subtly, as teams must navigate not only physical terrain, but also the social and psychological sensitivities embedded in the area. Awareness of the forest's reputation adds a layer of caution to every decision, emphasizing that not all risk is environmental. Aerial reconnaissance is of limited value. Even drones struggle to penetrate the thick canopy, leaving ground teams responsible for painstakingly slow and incomplete coverage. The density of the forest blocks sight lines, and shifting wind currents or fog can interfere with drones or small aircraft. Attempts to triangulate positions or track movement from above are often inconclusive, forcing reliance on physical search in areas where progress is hindered at every step. The forest thus limits not only movement but also the technological advantages that rescuers might otherwise bring to bear. Hidden crevices, sudden drops, and pockets of loose volcanic rock create hazards that magnify risk for any personnel moving through the forest in search of the missing. These features are often invisible until one is already upon them, making navigation a constant negotiation with the ground itself. Even when careful attention is applied, missteps can cause injury, which further complicates rescue efforts. In combination with the forest's visual and auditory absorption, these physical hazards help explain why teams may halt operations long before reaching the edge of the area being searched. Disappearance here rarely produces a clear endpoint. The forest absorbs movement, leaving only an impression of passage that cannot be confirmed or traced. Unlike mountains, deserts, or even dense swamps, Aokigahara's combination of roots, moss, and undergrowth creates a surface that erases itself, leaving nothing durable for investigation. Every trail, once left behind, quickly blends into the surrounding forest, and even deliberate attempts to mark a path can be undone by rainfall or shifting vegetation. The result is an environment that records presence selectively and unreliably, making each case a study in uncertainty. Operational decisions to halt recovery are incremental, based on repeated failed attempts and the recognition that persistence may endanger the rescuers themselves. Teams often reach points where the risk of injury, misdirection, or extended exposure outweighs the likelihood of locating the missing person. Every decision is carefully documented, reflecting not failure, but a measured assessment of the forest's absorbing capacity. The inability to recover someone is rarely dramatic. It is procedural, a recognition that the environment itself will not yield to conventional methods. After teams withdraw, the forest appears as if untouched, the undergrowth closing over paths and shadows shifting to erase all sign of human presence. Leaves, moss, and small branches reclaim disturbed areas, and the soundscape returns to its muted baseline, removing any trace of the movement that occurred. For those who have spent hours within the forest, it leaves an indelible impression of quiet disappearance, a place where activity can occur, yet evidence cannot persist, and where human presence is almost ephemeral against the enduring landscape. In Aokigahara, absence does not announce itself, and yet the forest keeps an unspoken record that no search can fully uncover. The Rub al Khali, Saudi Arabia. The horizon dissolves into an endless expanse of sand, where the sun scorches the land and distance itself seems to fold back on itself, challenging both perception and direction. Travellers and officials alike have long recognised this region, the Rub al Khali, or Empty Quarter, as one of the most inhospitable deserts on Earth, stretching across nearly 650,000 square kilometres of Saudi Arabia and its neighbouring countries. The immensity of the terrain, combined with extreme heat and shifting sands, has made conventional rescue operations nearly impossible, and even small movements in the distance are easily swallowed by the uniform landscape. In this environment, visibility and orientation vanish, leaving presence fragile and fleeting. Dunes rise in silent, undulating waves, their shapes shifting subtly with every gust, hiding ridges, hollows, and soft pockets that can swallow footprints within moments. The desert's surface is a constantly changing mosaic, sculpted by wind over centuries, forming erg systems with dunes that can exceed 250 metres in height. Even trained personnel must approach each rise with caution, aware that a seemingly solid slope might collapse under weight or conceal a hidden depression. The sheer scale of these formations makes systematic surveying slow, and the constant rearrangement of sand ensures that even the most careful tracking efforts can fail without warning. Interdunal depressions, salt flats and rare sinkholes emerge unexpectedly across the desert, their presence imperceptible until approached too closely. Interdunal flats, often crusted with salt or compacted sand, can break under weight, producing sudden collapses or swallowing equipment and footprints without a trace. Occasional sinkholes, caused by shifting subterranean geology, appear in otherwise flat terrain, creating hazards even for experienced personnel. Combined with the ever-moving dunes, these hidden features transform the landscape into a surface that is never fully reliable, reinforcing the sense that human presence in the Rub al Khali is fragile, temporary, and easily erased. The desert's uniformity warps judgment, making distant dunes appear deceptively near while closer ridges vanish into heat haze, disorienting even the most experienced navigators. Without trees, rocks, or other consistent reference points, the horizon stretches unbroken, and every ridge mirrors the last. Sunlight reflecting off pale sand intensifies this illusion, creating optical distortions that challenge depth perception and temporal estimation. Observers often report a creeping uncertainty, a sense that the desert is larger than memory allows, and that each footstep may be the beginning of an untraceable journey rather than a clear path forward. Relentless heat presses down, turning sand into a radiant mirror and taxing the endurance of anyone attempting to traverse the expanse for prolonged periods. Daytime temperatures can surpass 50 degrees Celsius in summer months, and even during cooler seasons, the sun's intensity accelerates dehydration and exhaustion. The desert's lack of shade or water sources forces anyone moving across it to ration supplies meticulously. Survival in such conditions demands precise preparation, and yet even the most experienced teams find themselves vulnerable to the compounding effects of heat stroke fatigue and disorientation, which magnify the landscape's already formidable challenges. Sandstorms can erupt without warning, reducing visibility to near zero and scattering all evidence of movement, leaving observers unsure whether anyone has passed at all. The desert's climate is unpredictable, with sudden gusts capable of rearranging entire dune faces in minutes. Tracks and discarded items disappear almost instantaneously, buried beneath drifting sand or erased by wind-blown dust. These storms create not only physical hazards, but also a pervasive sense of impermanence, as though the desert actively neutralizes signs of human presence and asserts control over all who enter. Compass readings and GPS signals are distorted by temperature gradients and mirages, creating false bearings that frustrate even technologically aided searches. The desert's extreme heat produces shimmering heat haze and optical illusions that can mislead navigators, while magnetic anomalies in the sand sometimes interfere with instrumentation. A single miscalculation can send a searcher miles off course, or into a series of dunes that appear identical to the last, further compounding the challenge of locating anyone who may have become lost or stranded. In the empty quarter, technology provides guidance, but the landscape dictates reality. Footprints, gear, and other traces vanish almost immediately under the shifting dunes, leaving no markers for tracking the missing and reinforcing the desert's capacity to erase presence. Even deliberate attempts to mark progress with flags or cairns are vulnerable to displacement by wind. Small personal items, such as clothing or equipment, are quickly buried or carried away, leaving rescuers with little to follow. The desert's ability to neutralize evidence is part of its enduring reputation, one that has dissuaded many from attempting recovery in its more remote sectors and contributes to the long-standing perception of its near impenetrable isolation. Local Bedouin knowledge indicates areas so uniform or treacherous that even experienced travelers avoid them, acknowledging zones where rescue is nearly impossible. Generations of nomadic experience have shown that certain regions of the empty quarter are effectively unreachable without precise timing, navigation, and support. While Bedouin guides possess an intimate understanding of water sources, dune patterns, and survival techniques, they even regard the vast interior with caution. Their caution underscores a critical reality. The desert is not hostile in a traditional sense, but enforces limits through scale, monotony, and the imperceptibility of absence. After repeated sweeps, officials often suspend efforts, recognizing that the desert's scale and shifting sands make further attempts both perilous and unlikely to yield results. When movement, tracks, and signals vanish in hours or minutes, continuing a search becomes a calculation of risk versus probability, rather than a question of endurance or skill. Personnel are withdrawn not in defeat but in acknowledgement of the desert's overwhelming capacity to conceal and absorb, leaving any missing person indistinguishable from the environment. In these conditions, human presence becomes impermanent, almost irrelevant against the desert's enduring patterns. Over hours and days, wind and gravity reshape every ridge and hollow, smoothing disturbances and leaving the desert surface pristine once more. What was once a footprint, a displaced rock, or a mark of passage is indistinguishable from the surrounding sand within hours. The dunes are in constant motion, and even previous survey data can become obsolete as ridges shift and valleys fill with sand. The desert's natural cycles erase traces systematically, creating a landscape where time, human effort, and memory are subordinate to the relentless rearrangement of earth and air. What remains after human passage is an unbroken monotony of sand, stretching beyond sight and erasing the evidence of every footstep or presence. There are no signs, no echoes, and no residual markers, only the uniform, shifting landscape that seems to extend infinitely. The desert's enormity and imperceptible movements render it a place where human vulnerability is amplified, and disappearance becomes almost routine in its inevitability. In the Rub al Khali, absence becomes a force of its own, and the desert records nothing but the quiet endurance of emptiness. Mount Nyiragongo's lava fields, Democratic Republic of Congo. Blackened fields stretch toward the base of Mount Nyiragongo, broken by glowing fissures that hiss and shimmer, a landscape that warns even the most prepared that rescue here may be impossible. The lava fields sprawling across the slopes of one of Africa's most active volcanoes form a terrain both mesmerizing and lethal, where hardened rock and molten veins coexist unpredictably. Officials and experienced locals treat certain areas with extreme caution, recognizing that the combination of heat, gas, and unstable surfaces renders conventional search or recovery operations extraordinarily dangerous and often futile for anyone caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. The hardened lava appears solid but conceals molten veins beneath, where a single misstep can pierce the crust and expose blinding heat that sears both body and gear. Smooth Pahoho flows create deceptively flat surfaces, while jagged R flows are brittle and sharp, able to collapse under weight with little warning. Even a small misjudgment can send a person plunging into molten channels hidden beneath seemingly solid crust. Travellers must constantly assess the rock beneath each foot, aware that lava fields are deceptive landscapes where appearance and reality rarely match, and where survival depends on careful observation combined with luck and experience. Nyiragongo's eruptions have produced some of the fastest moving lava flows recorded on Earth, racing down slopes at speeds capable of overtaking humans and reshaping the terrain within hours. The 1977 eruption overwhelmed nearby settlements, and the 2002 flows reached the city of Goma, forcing mass evacuations within hours. Lava here moves not only quickly but unpredictably, following fissures and paths that can shift without warning. These flows can obliterate everything in their path, leaving charred landscapes and hidden hazards in their wake. Any presence in these fields is ephemeral, measured in minutes rather than hours, as the volcano's restless energy reshapes the land constantly. Temperatures near fresh lava can exceed 1,000 degrees Celsius, radiating waves of heat that turn clothing into insulation traps and make prolonged exposure a matter of minutes rather than hours. Even a cautious observer experiences overwhelming radiant heat that saps strength and concentration. Equipment can warp or melt under extreme temperatures, while inhaling the ambient air accelerates dehydration and internal stress. Human endurance is tested not only by the danger of molten surfaces, but also by the oppressive intensity of the thermal environment, creating conditions where a single misstep can escalate into catastrophe with terrifying speed. Invisible yet deadly gases seep from fissures and vents. Concentrations of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide can accumulate in depressions, creating pockets of lethality even when the surface seems empty. Carbon dioxide is heavier than air and can collect in low-lying hollows, displacing oxygen without warning. Sulfur dioxide irritates eyes and lungs almost instantly, often causing disorientation or unconsciousness in mere minutes. These unseen hazards complicate any attempt at human intervention, as even the most skilled rescue teams can fall victim to conditions that offer no visual cues. The combination of molten rock and toxic air ensures that every movement is fraught with danger. Twisting fissures and hidden cracks thread through the crust, forming concealed chasms and molten pools that defy mapping and render every step uncertain. What appears to be solid terrain may be a thin layer of cooled lava bridging a glowing molten void. These hidden traps are nearly impossible to detect until a collapse occurs, leaving sudden danger without warning. Even experienced guides treat unknown sections of the lava field with extreme caution, using long poles or probes to test surfaces. In a place that seems frozen and inert, the ground itself is a living hazard, constantly shifting beneath human feet. Traditional navigation tools are unreliable here, as GPS coordinates and aerial maps struggle to reflect the shifting lava flows, while drones are threatened by heat and ash. Satellite imagery often fails to capture the minute fissures or recent flows that make the terrain unpredictable. Attempts to chart safe routes are undermined by thermal fracturing and collapses that occur between observation and approach. Guides often rely on memory and local knowledge, but even they cannot account for every unstable area. The lava field itself resists order and documentation, creating zones where human planning is only marginally effective. Signs of human passage vanish quickly, as glowing cracks spread ash over footprints and brittle surfaces crumble to expose molten rock beneath, leaving no evidence behind. Even equipment left as markers can be destroyed or engulfed by sudden collapses. The lava's constant movement erases traces of human presence almost immediately, transforming pathways into empty, unmarked ground. This ephemeral quality contributes to the field's reputation, reinforcing the perception that anyone who becomes lost here is unlikely to be found. Presence is fleeting and disappearance is often complete, leaving no clues for those who follow. Rescue efforts are halted when survival odds drop precipitously. The unpredictability of lava movement and the proximity of unstable fissures make continued searches a high-risk endeavour. Even experienced volcanologists and emergency personnel avoid venturing deep into these fields, except under controlled circumstances. Time is unforgiving, as molten channels can suddenly redirect and fissures can expand without warning. Beyond a certain point, the potential for human loss outweighs any chance of recovery, compelling teams to wait on the margins while the interior remains a volatile, untouchable zone. Even as lava cools, it fractures and buckles over time, continuously remoulding the landscape, erasing markers, and transforming the terrain into a labyrinth of newly concealed hazards. Cooled flows can develop hidden tunnels, sinkholes, and unstable ridges. Residual heat continues to warp the surface, causing subtle movements that shift rocks and create unpredictable gaps. The landscape's constant evolution ensures that no path remains permanently reliable and that any previous assessment of safety can become obsolete within hours. In the Nyiragongo lava fields, stability is a fleeting illusion, and permanence is a danger not to be trusted. From a distance, the lava fields appear static and desolate, yet close inspection reveals constant motion, the surface breathing with heat and concealed activity that belies its apparent stillness. Subtle tremors, steam plumes from hidden fissures, and glowing cracks under moonlight hint at the ongoing activity beneath the seemingly inert surface. The terrain's deceptive calm can lull observers into a false sense of security, yet the field's dynamic nature remains evident to anyone paying close attention. It is a place where observation and caution are inseparable, and where the earth itself commands vigilance at every step. In the heart of Nyiragongo, the ground itself seems to move with a quiet menace, ready to swallow anything unwise enough to linger. Nahanni National Park's Headless Valley, Canada. Mist rises from the depths of the canyons, concealing the valley in an early morning hush that hints at why search teams hesitate to enter. The terrain is a labyrinth of cliffs, dense boreal forests, and twisting river channels, creating an environment both remote and foreboding. Helicopters and small boats can only reach the edges, while foot access demands skill, endurance, and local knowledge. The valley's reputation for unexplained disappearances adds another layer of tension, as even cautious explorers understand that venturing too far can mean being lost to the wilderness entirely. Nature here dominates, indifferent to human ambition or concern. Cliffs and the roar of the Nahanni River carve the land into channels so deep and narrow that even experienced guides approach with caution. Vertical walls of rock rise hundreds of feet, creating shadowed corridors where sunlight barely penetrates. The river winds unpredictably, its force intensified by hidden rapids and sudden drops. Loose rocks and unstable ledges compound the danger, turning a simple climb or descent into a calculated risk. Canoes must navigate turbulent waters that appear calm until they vanish into whirlpools. In such a place, the combination of remoteness and natural obstacles ensures that error can quickly become a catastrophe. Sudden storms sweep through the northern wilderness, turning trails slick and rivers swollen, while long shadows conceal hazards that the eye cannot track. A brief cloudburst can swell a creek into a raging torrent, and overnight snowfall can mask cliffs and ravines. Temperature shifts are sudden, with warm mornings giving way to icy winds that chill unprepared travellers. In combination with uneven terrain and dense undergrowth, the weather renders any misstep more dangerous than usual. Awareness of environmental conditions is crucial, yet even the most attentive explorers can be blindsided by the valley's rapid changes, a reminder that human perception is fragile in such isolated landscapes. For decades, explorers and locals have noted the strange vanishings of those who wandered too far, leaving no trace and little explanation behind. Early 20th century accounts describe trappers and prospectors disappearing without warning, their camps found intact but empty. Even in more modern times, hikers and river guides have gone missing, often during otherwise uneventful trips. Searchers occasionally recover personal items, boots, packs or scattered equipment, but rarely bodies. The valley's combination of dense forest, cliffs and treacherous waterways creates an environment where natural hazards and misfortune converge, amplifying the mystique surrounding these unexplained disappearances. Bears and wolves patrol the forested slopes, adding a natural threat to an environment already made dangerous by isolation and rugged terrain. Grizzly bears traverse the riverbanks in search of fish during spawning seasons, while wolves move silently through dense trees, often unnoticed until proximity. Even smaller animals can pose threats. Moose can charge when startled, and beaver dams can create unstable crossings. The combination of predators and the sheer isolation of the wilderness increases risk, as a single encounter may escalate quickly. Humans entering the valley must respect the wildlife and the territory it claims, knowing the animals act without concern for human safety. Dense forest and narrow canyons confound even GPS devices, while winding trails and hidden ravines render orientation nearly impossible without intimate local knowledge. Trees grow thick and uneven, obscuring landmarks, while canyons and gullies distort perception of distance and direction. Mapping the area is difficult. Satellite imagery cannot capture the minute twists of the river, nor can aerial views show seasonal changes in vegetation or erosion. Many lost travellers have underestimated the difficulty of navigating this terrain, believing that straightforward maps or compasses are sufficient, only to find themselves hopelessly disoriented as paths vanish into thickets and canyon walls obscure previously familiar markers. The river itself holds treacherous secrets, whirlpools, hidden rocks, and rapids that can overturn canoes in an instant, leaving no room for error. Swift currents can appear calm, then suddenly funnel into jagged channels, smashing vessels against submerged boulders. Water levels fluctuate drastically with seasonal snowmelt and sudden rainfall, amplifying the danger unpredictably. Even small tributaries can become hazardous, cutting off access or creating rapids invisible from a distance. For guides and adventurers alike, the Nahanni River demands constant vigilance. One misjudged maneuver or underestimated flow can transform a routine trip into a life-threatening emergency in moments. Early explorers and indigenous guides documented the valley's hazards, noting the unnatural frequency of disappearances and the difficulty of predicting safe passage. Oral histories describe routes that shift over decades as erosion and floodwaters alter the landscape. Guides often warn newcomers against venturing into certain canyons or approaching specific rapids during high water. Despite knowledge passed through generations, the valley's geography continues to surprise even seasoned travelers. The repeated incidents of vanishings are a testament to its unpredictability, demonstrating that no amount of preparation can entirely mitigate the hazards that the valley conceals beneath its seemingly peaceful surface. Even the most experienced travelers quickly learn when to turn back, as cliffs, cold waters, and sudden terrain shifts transform the valley into an environment where survival becomes the only priority. Decisions to retreat are often made not out of caution alone, but out of recognition that the risks escalate faster than any rescue can respond. Isolated camps may provide temporary safety, but navigation errors can leave explorers stranded. Hypothermia, dehydration, or injury in such a place can be fatal before assistance arrives. Survival in the Headless Valley is not just about skill. It is about knowing when the land is too hostile to continue. Isolation magnifies perception, and even brief exposure to the valley's vast emptiness can disorient travelers, creating an unsettling awareness that the landscape is indifferent to human presence. Sounds echo strangely through the canyon walls, and shadows shift as light filters unevenly through dense trees. The mind fills in gaps, sensing movement where none exists, or misjudging distance to the river or cliffs. Solitude magnifies the human tendency toward caution and anxiety, making every rustle or splash a potential threat. In this environment, the wilderness seems to act almost intentionally, concealing its dangers while amplifying the traveler's uncertainty. Viewed from above, the valley appears deceptively tranquil, its rivers and forests concealing the hidden dangers and unresolved mysteries that lie within. Aerial perspectives reveal sweeping expanses of green and the winding silver of the Nahanni River, seemingly calm and navigable. Yet these images cannot convey the complexity of currents, the sharpness of cliffs, or the hidden depressions that have claimed the unwary. The calm surface belies the true hazards of the terrain, reminding observers that the Headless Valley's quiet beauty is matched only by its lethal unpredictability. The Headless Valley waits silently, its history of disappearance serving as a quiet warning that some places are best left unentered. The Siberian Taiga near the Vitim River, Russia. Snowdrifts climb the slopes and fill every hollow, turning the Siberian Taiga near the Vitim River into a vast silent maze that few dare to navigate. The region stretches across hundreds of kilometers, a patchwork of coniferous forest, frozen wetlands and jagged ridges. Even seasoned travelers quickly discover how unforgiving the terrain can be. Frost-laden trees collapse without warning, hidden ravines swallow paths, and visibility can vanish in seconds during sudden blizzards. The remoteness ensures that those who enter are largely on their own, and search teams approach only when the risk seems manageable. A rare circumstance in a landscape as merciless as this. Towering conifers and tangled undergrowth conceal marshes and hidden ravines, creating a labyrinthine forest where orientation is almost impossible for outsiders. The dense Siberian pines block landmarks, and moss-covered trunks and snow-laden branches distort perception. Travelers can pass the same grove multiple times without realizing it, or suddenly find themselves confronted by a steep ravine they hadn't seen before. Small streams, often frozen or partially hidden beneath snow, can become unexpected obstacles. Even local hunters caution that knowledge of the land is fleeting. Trails are ephemeral, and the forest constantly shifts with wind, snow, and thawing permafrost. Winter descends with merciless force, bringing temperatures that can plummet below -40 degrees Celsius, and storms that erase trails in minutes. A sudden blizzard can turn a familiar path into a white void, masking cliffs and river edges and disorienting even those who have travelled the route many times. Snowdrifts accumulate unpredictably, swallowing fallen trees and debris, hiding hazards that the eye cannot detect. Frostbite and hypothermia are constant threats, and the combination of isolation and extreme cold makes every step a matter of calculation. In this frozen expanse, nature's indifference is absolute, and the margin for human error is vanishingly small. The Vitim River snakes through the taiga like a steel-grey serpent, its ice-covered surface hiding treacherous currents and sudden ice breaks. While it appears navigable from a distance, beneath the frozen crust, the river churns with powerful undercurrents that can sweep a traveller away instantly. Ice thickness varies unpredictably, and pressure ridges can fracture without warning. During the spring thaw, the river swells and shifts course, flooding trails and carving new channels. Canoeists and hikers who underestimate the river's danger have vanished, leaving only personal items on the banks as a grim reminder that the apparent calm of the Vitim is deceiving. Reports of travellers vanishing without a trace have persisted for decades, from hunters and trappers to occasional adventurers drawn to the wilderness. Accounts from Soviet-era expeditions and local records document the disappearance of entire hunting parties or lone travellers, sometimes leaving behind only empty camps or abandoned equipment. Even experienced guides have noted that the forest itself seems to obscure evidence of misfortune, as if the taiga actively conceals its secrets. Such incidents have contributed to the region's formidable reputation, dissuading search teams and outsiders alike, and establishing the Vitim River's corridor as one of the most perilous stretches of the Siberian North. Bears roam the dense forests, and wolves patrol the snow-laden trails, predators whose presence adds yet another peril to the already forbidding environment. During the winter months, food scarcity drives wildlife closer to human routes, increasing the likelihood of dangerous encounters. Brown bears can emerge from hibernation unexpectedly, and wolves hunt in packs, moving silently through snow that muffles human detection. Even seemingly small threats like foxes or aggressive moose can escalate in isolated conditions. Travellers are forced to remain alert constantly, understanding that predators here are opportunistic and that the forest allows no margin for complacency. Even with modern tools, navigation remains perilous. Compasses can mislead in magnetic anomalies, and GPS signals are often weak beneath the dense canopy. Snow-covered landmarks shift from day to day, and frozen rivers can mask previously visible markers. Mistaken bearings or reliance on electronics alone can quickly turn a routine journey into a dangerous misadventure. Many of the vanishings in the Vitim region have involved individuals who trusted their instruments more than their instincts, only to find themselves stranded in an environment where no one can reach them in time. The forest demands both respect and intimate knowledge to traverse safely. Each season reshapes the taiga, with spring thaw flooding trails, summer growth concealing hazards, and winter ice masking the true depth of the river and marshes. Seasonal cycles are unpredictable in Siberia, with early thaws catching travellers off guard and sudden freezes creating unstable surfaces. Fallen trees rot or shift, and the landscape's appearance can change dramatically from one year to the next. Even the most carefully studied maps quickly become outdated. The ever-shifting nature of the terrain makes planning rescue missions nearly impossible and adds to the region's mystique, reinforcing its reputation as a place from which few return. The isolation of the taiga has a psychological weight, where endless white snow or shadowed forests can twist perception and make time feel suspended, unnervingly elongating every step. Travellers report feelings of disorientation, a sense that landmarks move or vanish, and a creeping awareness of being utterly alone in a vast, uncaring wilderness. Snow muffles sounds, distances seem to stretch, and the landscape blurs into monotony. Mental fatigue and fear compound physical challenges, turning minor miscalculations into life-threatening situations. Even for seasoned explorers, the combination of extreme isolation, harsh environment, and the taiga's uncanny quiet creates a sense of unease that lingers long after leaving. Rescue operations face nearly insurmountable obstacles. Helicopters struggle against sudden storms, ground teams risk frostbite and avalanches, and communication with the outside world is unreliable at best. In many cases, the cost and danger of attempting recovery exceed any perceived chance of success. Reports of attempted rescues often end with teams turning back or limiting their search to the safest accessible areas, leaving the missing unaccounted for. The terrain, climate, and remoteness converge to make intervention nearly impossible, reinforcing the belief that the Tsingy Taiga is one of the few places on Earth where human presence is frail and fleeting. Seen from high ridges or occasional aerial surveys, the taiga appears serene, its vast green and white swathes hiding deadly conditions and the stories of those who disappeared. Rivers glint in the sunlight, forests stretch unbroken to the horizon, and snow-tipped peaks suggest beauty rather than peril. Yet beneath this serene surface lies a labyrinth of hidden dangers. Frozen rivers that collapse, snow-laden slopes that conceal ravines, and forests so dense they defy navigation. The calm is deceptive, and the history of vanishings ensures that anyone who ventures here does so with the knowledge that the wilderness is both spectacular and lethal. The Siberian Taiga near the Vitim River waits patiently, a frozen labyrinth that seems to swallow all who stray too far into its silent embrace. The Hoia Baciu Forest, Romania. On the outskirts of Cluj-Napoca, the Hoia Baciu Forest stretches over 200 hectares, a seemingly ordinary woodland that professional rescuers approach with hesitation due to its history of disappearances. The forest is often described as a dense, quiet place where sunlight struggles to penetrate the canopy, giving the impression of perpetual twilight. Locals speak cautiously about it, warning that those who wander too far may never return. Even first-time visitors quickly realize that conventional navigation fails here. Paths curve unpredictably, familiar landmarks vanish, and the forest seems to shift around those who attempt to map it. Within the forest, gnarled oaks twist skyward in unnatural shapes, while dense undergrowth and shadowed clearings create a labyrinth that confounds even experienced hikers. The trees themselves appear to resist order, with branches spiraling in impossible angles and roots forming barricades across narrow trails. Beneath their thick canopy, mosses and ferns create a cushion that muffles footsteps, and fog often settles in low pockets, further reducing visibility. Hikers have reported feeling watched even in broad daylight, and the oppressive stillness amplifies every creak or distant bird call. The forest's layout makes even short excursions seem like extended journeys into the unknown. Accounts of missing persons have circulated for decades, including hikers who vanished without a trace, sometimes leaving only backpacks or scattered personal items behind. Records from local authorities document cases dating back to the 18th century, though many incidents went unreported in earlier times. Some disappearances involved entire groups, while others concern individuals who reportedly entered the forest for no more than a casual walk. Even when search parties were dispatched, they often returned without answers, sometimes discovering only abandoned equipment or footprints that seemed to fade into thin air. The frequency and consistency of these disappearances reinforce the forest's reputation as a place from which few return. Visitors frequently report strange phenomena, flickering lights between the trees, unexplained sounds, and sudden electronic malfunctions that seem to target cameras, compasses, and radios. Photographs occasionally show orbs or light anomalies, and hikers describe hearing whispers, laughter, or rustling that cannot be traced. Some report sudden drops in temperature or a feeling of being pushed or touched by unseen forces. These experiences are not limited to superstition. Even scientific instruments have registered erratic readings that cannot be explained by natural causes. Such anomalies contribute to a growing body of evidence that Hoia Baciu is unlike any ordinary forest. Local folklore describes the forest as a place inhabited by spirits or fairies, a cultural fear that has been passed down for generations and adds to the forest's reputation for danger. Villagers speak of entities that mislead travellers or protect the forest from outsiders, and some stories suggest that anyone who disrespects the trees may be cursed. Folklorists have noted that these tales often coincide with areas where disappearances are concentrated, reinforcing the forest's mystique. While skeptical observers may dismiss these accounts as superstition, the psychological impact of such beliefs cannot be ignored, shaping how both locals and visitors perceive and interact with the landscape. Many who enter describe intense disorientation, a creeping sense of panic, and an altered perception that makes paths twist and distances feel distorted. Compasses spin unpredictably, GPS devices fail, and even familiar markers seem to move or disappear entirely. Hikers frequently report losing track of time, sometimes believing hours have passed in what was only minutes or vice versa. The combination of visual distortions, sudden shadows, and unnatural sounds creates an environment that plays tricks on the mind. These experiences can escalate quickly, causing visitors to make critical navigation errors that further endanger their safety. Occasional scientific studies have documented anomalous magnetic readings and electromagnetic activity, though no explanation fully accounts for the experiences reported by visitors. Investigators measuring electromagnetic fields in certain sections of the forest found localized spikes that could interfere with electronic devices and human perception. Soil samples show no unusual composition, and no meteorological patterns fully explain the anomalies. While research is limited and sometimes informal, these findings lend credence to accounts of odd phenomena. They suggest that Hoia Baciu may harbour conditions that interact with both technology and human senses in ways that remain poorly understood. The thick canopy and uneven terrain conceal sudden dips, hollow logs, and dense vegetation that can trap or mislead those unfamiliar with the forest's deceptive layout. Hidden depressions can collapse underfoot, while roots and underbrush form natural obstacles that are difficult to traverse. Even well-marked trails can lead unexpectedly into dense groves or dead ends. Snow or fallen leaves often conceal these hazards, and the forest floor shifts subtly over time, erasing previous paths. For those unfamiliar with the terrain, what seems like a clear route can become a confounding maze in moments, amplifying the forest's reputation as a place best approached with caution. Amateur explorers and paranormal investigators have entered, hoping to document phenomena, but several never returned or abandoned their research after brief, unnerving experiences. Reports suggest that some investigators experienced intense vertigo, sudden headaches, or an overwhelming sense of unease that forced them to leave. Others returned with photographs or recordings that could not be explained and chose not to release them publicly. These accounts, combined with the forest's documented disappearances, discourage professional search teams from attempting extended operations, as the environment is unpredictable and potentially psychologically hazardous. Despite its dangers, the forest continues to attract curious adventurers, drawn by tales of the unexplained and the chilling accounts of past visitors. Tourists and thrill-seekers venture inside for the challenge, the lore, or the hope of witnessing something extraordinary. Guided tours exist but rarely penetrate the more remote or notoriously strange areas, leaving the deepest secrets largely untouched. Each new account, whether an unsettling photograph, a sudden panic episode, or a missing person, adds to the forest's growing reputation, creating a feedback loop of fascination and fear that draws people in even as it warns them away. At the forest's edge, its outward calm belies the strange events and disappearances recorded within, hinting at mysteries that have long defied explanation. What appears serene from the boundary is anything but ordinary inside, where reality seems to bend and the ordinary rules of navigation, perception, and technology fail repeatedly. Visitors who cross that threshold enter a world where shadows move without source, light behaves unpredictably, and the forest itself seems to watch and respond. The contrast between its placid exterior and unnerving interior enhances the sense that Hoia Baciu is a living puzzle that conceals more than it reveals. The Hoia Baciu forest waits in silence, a twisting maze of shadow and legend that seems to consume anyone who ventures too far within its depths. Mount Ararat's upper slopes, Turkey. Rising abruptly from the plains of eastern Turkey, Mount Ararat dominates the skyline, its upper slopes notorious for the dangers that have long discouraged rescuers from venturing too far. The mountain, standing at 5,137 metres, is the highest peak in Turkey and a striking stratovolcano with twin summits. Its slopes are steep and icy, often shrouded in cloud or fog, giving the impression of an isolated world far removed from surrounding settlements. Even seasoned mountaineers approach the upper reaches with caution, as the combination of altitude, weather, and treacherous terrain has thwarted countless attempts to reach the summit or conduct rescues. Glaciers wind down the mountain like frozen rivers, hiding deep crevasses and unstable snowfields that turn every step into a calculated risk for even experienced climbers. These glacial formations can shift suddenly, leaving hidden voids beneath deceptively solid surfaces. Meltwater channels carve slippery channels into rock and ice, while patches of loose scree create hazards for anyone ascending without precise knowledge. Avalanches can be triggered by subtle changes in temperature or movement, and falling ice is a constant threat. Each step on the upper slopes requires careful attention, as the mountain itself seems to demand respect and patience from those who dare to climb. Historical records recount climbers and explorers who vanished on the upper slopes, sometimes during brief forays, leaving only footprints or equipment scattered across ice and rock. Russian, Turkish, and international mountaineering logs include reports of climbers lost in sudden storms or disappearing without explanation. Occasionally, aerial surveys spot abandoned tents, backpacks, or ice axes in areas too dangerous for recovery. These unresolved incidents contribute to the mountain's ominous reputation, signalling that even minimal exposure to the upper reaches carries serious risk. The pattern of disappearances and the inability of teams to recover all evidence reinforce why search operations are approached with extreme caution. Legends of Noah's Ark perched somewhere near the summit have lured adventurers for centuries, their fascination fueled by reports of wooden structures or strange formations seen in satellite images and aerial surveys. Archaeologists, explorers, and amateur enthusiasts have ventured into the high-altitude zone, driven by the hope of finding remnants of the Ark described in biblical texts. Local folklore describes unusual sightings of timber-like debris emerging from the ice after storms. These tales, whether grounded in fact or imagination, create a persistent aura of mystery around the mountain, attracting those willing to risk both altitude and environment to uncover something extraordinary. Verified mountaineering expeditions describe the mountain as unforgiving, with some teams turning back just meters from the summit due to sudden storms or unstable terrain, highlighting the mountain's lethal reputation. Ascents often require days of acclimatization and careful planning, yet conditions can shift unpredictably. Glacier travel, steep rock faces, and hidden ice pockets challenge climbers physically and mentally. Even experienced mountaineers report a constant sense of vigilance, knowing that a single misstep could trigger an accident. The repeated failures of well-equipped professional expeditions underscore the mountain's capacity to repel those who underestimate its dangers. Snowstorms can materialize within minutes, obliterating visibility and creating wind tunnels that strip warmth from the body, making rescue attempts nearly impossible and leaving climbers at extreme risk. Whiteout conditions can render even familiar routes unrecognizable, and temperatures can drop well below freezing without warning. High-altitude wind gusts can topple climbers or sweep them into crevasses, while icefall hazards increase dramatically during storms. These conditions make the upper slopes a place where time and exposure are critical, and where any rescue attempt is constrained by both terrain and the relentless forces of nature. Altitude sickness, hypothermia, and the disorienting isolation of the upper reaches weigh heavily on climbers, often impairing judgment and turning minor mistakes into life-threatening situations. The thinning air makes every movement exhausting, slowing reaction times and reducing cognitive clarity. Hypothermia can set in unexpectedly, particularly during rest periods when climbers assume they're safe. Combined with treacherous footing, sudden weather changes, and psychological stress, these factors explain why even small expeditions are often abandoned or require emergency evacuation before reaching the summit. Survival depends on vigilance, experience, and respect for the mountain's relentless environment. Some explorers have reported unusual ice patterns and rock formations that seem deliberate, as if sculpted by forces beyond ordinary geology, adding a sense of the inexplicable to the perilous environment. Certain crevasses appear to form geometric alignments, and frost heaves sometimes resemble carved structures. Climbers describe eerie impressions of straight lines or angular formations amidst otherwise chaotic rock and ice, fueling speculation and debate. While scientists attribute these to natural glacial movement or geological processes, the alignment with local legends intensifies the mystique. Even rational observers are struck by the feeling that the mountain conceals something hidden and anomalous just beyond perception. Professional rescue teams often refuse to attempt missions here, citing not only treacherous terrain but also a history of failed attempts and the impossibility of predicting sudden avalanches or rock slides. Helicopter extractions are limited by high-altitude conditions, and snow-covered cliffs and icefall zones make ground access nearly impossible. Historical incidents show that teams attempting to recover lost climbers risk creating additional casualties. As a result, local authorities and mountaineering organisations frequently restrict rescue operations, emphasising prevention, preparedness, and caution rather than intervention in the uppermost zones. Adventurers and archaeologists continue to challenge the mountain's upper reaches, drawn by the allure of discovering something long hidden amid the ice and rock. Despite the documented dangers, small teams equipped with climbing gear, satellite devices, and high-altitude experience push toward the summit, driven by both scientific curiosity and legend. Each expedition confronts the harsh climate, hidden crevasses, and disorienting terrain while navigating the balance between ambition and safety. The persistent allure demonstrates humanity's enduring fascination with what lies beyond the edge of known exploration, especially when history and myth intertwine so closely. The summit's jagged silhouette suggests tranquility to onlookers, yet climbers know that every ridge conceals hidden dangers and centuries of unanswered mysteries. From afar, Ararat can appear serene, bathed in sunlight or cloaked in soft clouds, but those who ascend understand the complexity of its upper slopes. Ice, rock, and the mountain's unpredictable personality combine to create an environment where the line between survival and catastrophe is narrow. Even experienced climbers treat each ascent with reverence, aware that the mountain's legends are inseparable from its tangible, lethal reality. Mount Ararat's upper slopes remain a domain where history, myth, and danger converge, claiming the unwary and defying anyone who seeks to fully unravel its secrets. The empty quarter border zones, Oman. The border zones of Oman's empty quarter stretch in vast, unbroken silence, a region where even the most experienced rescuers hesitate to tread. Sand, wind, and sun dominate this part of the Rub al Khali, the largest continuous sand desert in the world, whose dunes can reach over 250 metres in height. Even aerial surveys cannot fully capture the scale of the desert, and the extreme isolation of these border zones amplifies the dangers. Few governments authorize travel into the area, and search operations are exceedingly rare, leaving it a place where disappearances often remain permanent and unexplained. Under the relentless sun, dunes ripple endlessly, but faint depressions and hardened tracks hint at human passage that has long since vanished. Caravan paths and vehicle ruts are often visible, only briefly before the wind erases them, creating a landscape that is constantly rewriting itself. Explorers note that even experienced desert travelers can misjudge distance, mistaking the scale of dunes and salt flats under bright sunlight. Heat shimmer blurs perception, and mirages can transform a flat plain into a deceptive illusion of cliffs or water. Every movement through this shifting terrain requires careful navigation, or the desert quickly claims those who misstep. Ancient trade routes etched across the sand have become traps over centuries, their markers erased by wind, leaving behind whispers of vanished caravans. Historically, merchants crossed these routes with camels, transporting frankincense, myrrh, and other goods between southern Arabia and the Gulf. Yet over decades, shifting dunes and occasional sandstorms have swallowed the trails, making navigation nearly impossible without local knowledge. Travelers have reported entire expeditions disappearing overnight, leaving only scattered remnants of belongings exposed when the wind shifts the sand. The empty quarter preserves its secrets by removing the evidence of human presence almost as quickly as the travelers themselves vanish. Satellite images reveal subtle anomalies in the landscape, geometries that defy natural explanation and seem to mark spaces where travelers disappeared. Linear depressions, clusters of unusually compacted sand, and faint rectangular formations have occasionally appeared in aerial surveys, sparking curiosity among desert scientists. While some geologists argue that these shapes result from natural wind and erosion patterns, others suggest that they may be linked to human activity or lost settlements long covered by dunes. Regardless of origin, these anomalies add a layer of unease, hinting at the desert's ability to conceal more than just travelers. Border patrols and political restrictions complicate any approach, creating zones where survival is challenged as much by human regulation as by the desert itself. Oman's border with Saudi Arabia is sparsely monitored, but venturing into restricted zones without authorization can lead to detainment or fines. Maps are often incomplete or outdated, and GPS signals may be unreliable due to the remote terrain. Even well-prepared explorers must consider bureaucratic hazards along with environmental ones. The combination of legal boundaries, harsh terrain, and extreme isolation ensures that rescue missions are not only difficult but often impossible. Bedouin accounts speak of sudden hollows appearing overnight and water sources that vanish without a trace, making the desert feel almost sentient to those who navigate it. Tribal stories describe travelers who disappeared near hidden depressions that swallow tents, camels, or even small vehicles. Local guides warn that some wells and oases appear only seasonally, with hidden underground channels that can collapse without warning. These oral traditions, passed down over generations, reinforce the notion that the empty quarter is a living landscape capable of erasing evidence and defying human control, challenging anyone who dares to traverse its remote reaches. Noon brings heat so intense it warps perception, and mirages appear to flatten dunes or conceal depressions, tricking even seasoned explorers into danger. Travelers often report seeing distant mountains or bodies of water that vanish as they approach, a phenomenon amplified by the desert's flat expanses and uniform light. The body's reaction to extreme heat, disorientation, dehydration, and fatigue compounds the threat. Even those with advanced preparation, water supplies, and survival knowledge can be deceived as the landscape constantly shifts and plays on the senses. In such conditions, mistakes become almost inevitable, and the desert quietly enforces its rules. Technological expeditions using drones, GPS, and aerial mapping often fail to reveal the desert's full treachery, as shifting sands constantly rewrite the terrain. Scientists have documented how sand drifts, dune collapses, and hidden salt flats alter the landscape over days, sometimes erasing tracks, markers, or even small equipment. Remote sensing can identify anomalies, but it cannot predict sudden environmental hazards or locate travelers lost beneath shifting sand. Each attempt to map the area highlights both the scale of the desert and the limitations of modern technology when confronted with a landscape that operates on its own rhythms. Occasional relics of past travelers, a rusted container, a fragment of pottery, surface briefly, then disappear under drifting sands, leaving only questions behind. Archaeologists and explorers report fleeting glimpses of artifacts, often revealed by minor dune shifts or wind erosion, only to vanish again. These fragments hint at the historical use of the region by traders and nomads, but also underscore the ephemeral nature of human presence in the desert. The impermanence of these discoveries creates a sense of haunting impermanence, as if the desert itself deliberately erases all traces, ensuring its stories remain tantalizingly out of reach. Despite these hazards, researchers and thrill-seekers are drawn to the empty quarter, compelled by reports of phenomena no map can fully explain. Expeditions aim to study desert geology, climate patterns, or lost trade routes, while adventurers pursue the thrill of traversing a place that few dare to enter. Even satellite imagery and GPS cannot fully diminish the allure of exploring a region that resists both observation and intervention. Each expedition tests endurance, navigation skills, and the ability to respond to sudden environmental challenges, often revealing how unforgiving this border zone truly is. At dusk, the desert assumes a deceptive calm, yet shadows stretch in unnatural ways, hinting at dangers and secrets that evade even scrutiny. The shifting sun elongates dunes into unfamiliar shapes, and pockets of windblown sand can suddenly obscure depressions. Travelers must remain vigilant, as the beauty of the desert conceals the ever-present threat of exhaustion, misdirection, and disappearance. Even experienced guides warn that the night brings new hazards, from rapidly cooling temperatures to the disorientation of featureless expanses, reinforcing the desert's reputation as a place where preparation cannot fully guarantee safety. In these border zones of the empty quarter, every trace of passage is ephemeral, leaving the desert as the final arbiter of what remains and what is lost forever. Lake Baikal's northern shore, Russia. A sudden hollow boom echoed beneath the frozen surface, startling even the most seasoned guides who dared to approach Lake Baikal's northern reaches. The sound carried across the expanse with a resonance that seemed almost unnatural, as if the lake itself was speaking in low, inhuman tones. Ice sheets shifted subtly beneath the snow, sending vibrations through the sleds and feet of anyone near the shore. Even those familiar with Baikal's winter extremes paused instinctively, scanning the horizon where grey skies merged with the distant white horizon. It was the kind of sound that no map could warn against, and no prior expedition could fully prepare one for, signalling a presence in the environment both physical and enigmatic. Footprints abruptly stopped on the ice, swallowed by snow that drifted faster than anyone could track, leaving only a silent warning. Local guides speak of these occurrences as if the snow itself has a will, erasing paths and concealing danger within hours. Some footprints vanish within a single night, others seem to twist and curve unnaturally before fading entirely. Even experienced travellers cannot fully predict where the ice is reliable, and many who have misread the signs have never returned. The sudden absence of these marks turns the lake into a labyrinth of uncertainty, and what once appeared safe becomes a treacherous puzzle overnight. The brittle surface groaned under weight, reminding travellers that the frozen expanse could collapse without notice or reason. Ice that looked solid could give way to voids tens of meters deep, swallowing sleds or snowmobiles in seconds. These cracks appear and vanish unpredictably, often with no external warning other than a faint tremor or a distant hiss. The sound itself seems to propagate differently across sections of the lake, a peculiar phenomenon that has long puzzled glaciologists studying Baikal. Every step carries tension, every measured motion is calculated against the possibility of sudden disaster, and even the most careful expedition feels at the mercy of the lake's hidden mechanics. Stories of missing fishermen and vanished sleds circulated through nearby villages, each disappearance reinforcing the lake's fearsome reputation. Accounts are often precise, noting the last known locations and the weather at the time, yet they end in uncertainty. Some locals refuse to venture near the northern shore entirely during winter, recalling relatives who were never recovered. Occasionally families report hearing the same hollow booms that modern guides have recorded, and the anecdotes carry a shared theme of disappearance without a trace. Over decades, these stories have layered into the cultural memory, creating a psychological boundary as formidable as the physical one. A low vibration ran through the ice, a sound unlike any wind or cracking ice, unsettling those who paused to listen. Researchers reported occurring in the coldest nights, often when air temperatures drop sharply and the lake contracts. The vibrations can be heard for kilometers, resonating through sled runners, tent stakes, and even the bone. Scientists have speculated about ice fault resonances or trapped air pockets under massive ice sheets, but no theory fully accounts for the timing or intensity. For those on the lake, the effect is almost sentient, a deep warning that cannot be ignored, amplifying the sense of vulnerability in a landscape already devoid of conventional landmarks. Scientists studying the lake's depth and currents discovered sudden underwater fissures capable of shifting ice sheets above without warning. Baikal's unique geology makes this northern stretch particularly dangerous. The lake sits atop tectonic faults, and its waters plunge to over 1,600 meters in depth. Strong undercurrents and submerged ridges can create unpredictable pressures that lift, crack, or hollow the ice above. Even the most sophisticated sensors cannot always detect these hazards in real time, leaving researchers dependent on experience and intuition in a setting where mistakes can be fatal. Every expedition into this area is therefore a calculated risk against forces larger than any human control. Elders of the Buryat and Evenk peoples spoke of spirits dwelling beneath the ice, cautioning outsiders to tread lightly or risk more than hypothermia. Their oral histories describe the northern shore as a realm of unsettled forces, where the ice can carry humans away, and where strange lights or sounds often presage danger. While modern explorers may interpret these tales metaphorically, the stories are rooted in observation. The lake's shifting ice, sudden storms, and untraceable disappearances are woven into cautionary narratives. For visitors, these legends enhance the sense of unease, giving the landscape a weight beyond the measurable, a presence felt but never fully understood. Even drones and remote sensors often fail to detect hazards, as ice thickness and cracks could change within hours, defying technology and intuition alike. Maps are rendered obsolete daily by drifting snow, wind erosion, and thermal stress, while visual cues on the ice are deceptive under low light. Drones can provide an aerial view, but the subtle hollows and fragile sheets of ice escape detection until too late. For this reason, Even the most advanced scientific missions avoid venturing too far from shorelines that are confirmed stable, highlighting how human innovation is often humbled by nature in its rawest, most unpredictable form. Small pools of meltwater formed overnight, sometimes concealing gaping voids that had already claimed the careless and the unprepared. Travellers report stepping into what appears to be solid ice, only to find themselves balanced atop shallow water before plunging through. These depressions can stretch for meters, hidden by snowdrifts that appear flat from afar. Even experienced ice fishermen exercise extreme caution, probing the ice continuously to avoid sudden collapse. The northern shore's microhazards, combined with its vastness, create a maze of danger that challenges comprehension as much as physical endurance. Researchers and thrill-seekers returning from the shore described an eerie stillness, a quiet that made navigation and judgment almost impossible in the fading light. The horizon blurs in winter twilight, and the uniform expanse of white snow and ice removes all visual reference points. Even sound behaves differently here, carrying across the ice in a manner that distorts distance and direction. Those who have exited the northern shore report an acute awareness of the lake's power, a mix of awe and trepidation that lingers long after leaving the ice. The stillness is deceptive, for beneath it lies a realm of forces beyond human mastery. Twilight brought long shadows across the frozen lake, and the slightest sound seemed amplified, as if the expanse itself was listening. Shapes and movements are distorted in dim light, making the observer doubt their own perceptions. Frost patterns and ridges cast optical illusions, while distant cracks produce noises that can mimic voices or footsteps. Every element conspires to create uncertainty, a psychological weight layered atop the already tangible hazards. In this frozen theatre, humans are perpetually small and vulnerable, and the lake's presence is inescapable even without visible motion or sound. Across the northern shore, cracks and currents hide truths that no search or human curiosity has yet revealed. The Devil's Sea, Dragon's Triangle, Japan. A sudden drop in temperature made the deck slick, and the waves seemed to twist unnaturally around the bow, unnerving even the most experienced sailors navigating the Devil's Sea. Instruments flickered unpredictably, and compasses swung in wide arcs, leaving crews disoriented in waters that had claimed countless ships over the decades. Even on clear days, the horizon seemed to bend, as if the ocean itself refused to reveal its limits, and seasoned captains often hesitated to cross into the triangle without extensive preparation. Local mariners whisper that the sea has a mind of its own, and that no skill can fully account for its moods, a warning echoed by every vessel lost within its boundaries. Ship logs occasionally end mid-sentence, with entries describing instruments failing and eerie lights flickering across the water, leaving unanswered questions for those who follow. In one account from the 1950s, a Japanese cargo ship recorded a sudden distortion in radar readings, accompanied by an inexplicable fog that enveloped the deck in minutes. Crew members described sounds like distant bells, reverberating through the mist, though no other vessels were nearby. These unexplained phenomena recur so frequently that even maritime historians have noted a consistent pattern of strange occurrences clustered within the triangular area east of Japan. The ocean can rise without warning, forming walls of water that vanish as quickly as they appear, challenging every assumption about its behaviour. Rogue waves in the Dragon's Triangle have been measured at heights exceeding 30 metres, appearing in seas that moments before were calm. Currents twist and collide, sometimes dragging vessels into whirlpools or sudden depressions that have no visible cause. Even the most sophisticated modern ships report instability and mechanical anomalies when caught in these transient phenomena, leaving captains with little more than instinct to navigate through the chaos. Tales from local fishermen describe phantom vessels that appear briefly in fog, only to dissolve into mist, leaving no trace behind. Many recount sudden lights dancing over the waves in formations impossible for human sailors to mimic, or the sudden vanishing of fishing boats that had been visible moments before. These stories are not dismissed by mariners. Decades of oral accounts reinforce a reputation that has made the triangle an area shunned by the unprepared, where even the most experienced crews tread with caution and trepidation. Unexplained magnetic anomalies interfere with navigation, causing compasses to swing erratically and leaving crews unsure of which direction is safe. In certain areas of the triangle, the magnetic field appears to fluctuate violently, sometimes reversing polarity for brief periods, rendering both traditional and modern navigation devices unreliable. These shifts have been measured by oceanographers but defy consistent explanation, adding another layer of mystery to a region already infamous for its disappearances. Strange luminescent patterns on the surface are sometimes mistaken for distant ships, yet they move in ways no human or known marine species could create. Fishermen have described formations resembling lines of lights advancing across the water and then vanishing abruptly, leaving no wake or disturbance. Submersible cameras occasionally capture glowing columns of water ascending from the depths, but their source remains unknown, reinforcing the area's reputation as a place where the ordinary laws of physics seem to bend or fail. Patrols seldom enter the triangle, as sudden storms and unpredictable currents make search or rescue operations almost impossible without extreme risk. Japanese maritime authorities have noted that even heavily equipped vessels struggle to maintain position in the central waters, and rescue efforts are only attempted in emergencies where survival is immediately threatened. The combination of erratic winds, deep trenches, and rapid weather shifts has created a maritime environment that even modern technology cannot fully control, leaving the triangle a domain where human intervention is frequently futile. Sailors report a peculiar vertigo and sense of disorientation that sets in before any visual hazard appears, as though the sea itself is warping perception. Reports describe instruments suddenly failing, visual markers appearing distorted, and the horizon seeming to tilt unexpectedly, making it difficult to discern distance or direction. These experiences are so consistent that many crews describe them as a tangible presence, as though the waters themselves resist observation or intrusion, amplifying the sense of danger inherent in traversing the region. Underwater ridges and trenches can redirect currents violently, producing whirlpools or pressure zones that capsize small vessels without warning. Oceanographers have mapped these features, noting that the Dragon's Triangle sits atop complex tectonic intersections where subduction zones create turbulence unseen on surface charts. While ships may pass safely above these areas at times, minor deviations in path or timing can bring sudden calamity, making the region unpredictable even for vessels designed for extreme conditions. Disappearances often cluster near deep-water trenches, where waves, wind, and uncharted undercurrents combine into deadly intersections of natural hazards. Researchers analysing long-term shipping data note that losses in the triangle are not random, but occur within precise zones that coincide with both geological instability and atmospheric turbulence. The resulting pattern suggests an invisible geography of peril, a network of hidden dangers that has eluded explanation while silently claiming lives over the decades. As night descends, the surface of the sea turns into a mirror of shifting shadows, making it impossible to judge distance or direction with certainty. The glow of bioluminescent organisms can create deceptive illusions, while reflected starlight mingles with the black waves, blurring the distinction between sky and water. Mariners navigating these conditions describe an almost hallucinatory experience, where instruments, perception and instinct must all be recalibrated to survive, underscoring the area's enduring reputation as an unwelcoming and enigmatic stretch of ocean. Within the Dragon's Triangle, every voyage becomes a negotiation with forces that defy measurement, leaving mysteries that no chart or instrument can resolve. Mount Washington's Huntington Ravine, USA. The first descent attempts reveal a vertical labyrinth of granite and ice, where a single misstep can vanish a climber from sight before help can reach them. Huntington Ravine, part of Mount Washington in New Hampshire, is infamous for extreme alpine conditions that can form suddenly even in summer, making it one of the most dangerous climbs in the northeastern United States. The walls rise sharply from the floor, funneling wind and precipitation into confined channels that can immobilize those attempting to ascend or descend. Search teams often approach with caution here, knowing that the risk to rescuers is as lethal as the terrain is unforgiving. The ravine's very reputation has created an unspoken boundary. Certain situations are deemed too dangerous for any human intervention. Wind howls through narrow gullies with such intensity that ropes tremble and equipment rattles, making navigation as much a test of endurance as of skill. Measured gusts on Mount Washington have reached hurricane force, and the confined geometry of the ravine magnifies their impact. Climbers report sudden buffeting that pushes against even the strongest footholds, while falling ice and snow can arrive without warning from above. The unpredictability of these gusts renders normal alpine techniques precarious, and many climbers rely on intuition honed from repeated exposure to extreme conditions. Every step requires constant attention, as one lapse can send a climber tumbling into a cliffside that offers no room for error. Sudden slabs of ice form overnight, transparent and deceptive, masking crevices and cliffs that have claimed experienced mountaineers without warning. In the colder months, these formations grow rapidly, combining with snow to create sheets that appear solid but can crack under weight. The terrain is deceptive. What seems like a safe ledge may conceal an abyss beneath, and climbers often use ice axes to test footing before advancing. The presence of mixed rock and ice adds another layer of hazard, as sliding from one surface to another is nearly unavoidable once a grip fails. Such conditions contribute to the phenomenon that even a small misjudgment can escalate into life-threatening consequences within moments. Climbing guides recount moments when visibility collapses in seconds, leaving even seasoned climbers disoriented on ledges that feel impossibly narrow. Fog and sudden storms frequently descend into the ravine, reducing the world to a few feet of visibility. Without a clear view of anchors or natural landmarks, orientation becomes nearly impossible, and the margin for error shrinks to zero. Even those familiar with the terrain report a creeping sense of vertigo as walls and ledges vanish into whiteness. Attempts to retreat or descend are complicated by slippery surfaces and sheer drops, often forcing climbers to freeze in place until conditions stabilise. Frostbite creeps silently, numbing fingers and toes, while the ravine's unforgiving walls seem to close in, shrinking the margin for error with each step. In sub-zero temperatures, exposure can incapacitate a climber in less than an hour, leaving them unable to hold ropes or grip rock. Hypothermia follows quickly when wind penetrates protective layers, and decision-making deteriorates alongside physical strength. Even simple tasks, like clipping carabiners or adjusting harnesses, become monumental struggles. Climbers describe the sensation of their extremities turning to ice, while their minds remain painfully aware of the dangers surrounding them. Avalanches roar without announcement, shifting tons of snow and ice down channels that offer no escape, and leaving survivors struggling against both injury and terrain. The narrow gullies act as natural funnels, channeling snow and debris with incredible force. Even small slides can sweep climbers off the rock face or bury equipment critical for survival. In winter and early spring, the combination of accumulated snow, steep slopes and wind-loaded cornices makes these slides nearly inevitable. There is no warning system. The forces are dictated purely by nature, and attempts to anticipate them are only marginally effective. Accounts from previous expeditions reveal that rescue teams often retreat after hours, as every additional minute in the ravine amplifies the danger beyond human endurance. Numerous attempts to reach stranded climbers have ended with rescuers themselves becoming victims of wind, ice, and exposure. The combination of cliffs, falling rock, and shifting snow creates a situation where organised search and rescue can quickly transform into another life-threatening mission. Decision-making is always a calculation of risk versus reward, and in many cases, the risks outweigh the possibility of successful extraction. Strange echoes and distorted sounds travel unpredictably through the rock faces, misleading climbers about the location of safety or even their own companions. The geometry of the ravine amplifies certain noises while muting others, creating the illusion that voices come from different directions or that movement occurs where there is none. Climbers describe the unsettling feeling of being surrounded by phantom steps, a perception that can cause hesitation or misjudgment in critical moments. Combined with the already extreme environment, these auditory anomalies heighten the tension and uncertainty for anyone attempting to navigate the ravine. Hypothermia can set in faster than the mind can recognize, producing hallucinations and impairing judgment just when the ravine demands absolute clarity. Symptoms often begin subtly, with confusion and disorientation that mimic fatigue, but escalate quickly into full mental impairment. Decisions that would normally be straightforward become impossible, and climbers may inadvertently step into hazards or mismanage equipment. In the cold and wind, even minor errors can lead to severe injury or death, a reality that reinforces why search teams often declare the area too perilous to attempt rescues. The ravine's vertical cliffs reflect sunlight in ways that create illusions of solidity or depth, tricking eyes and instruments alike into misreading the terrain. Early morning sun can cast shadows that appear as ledges or gaps where none exist, while icy surfaces mirror sky and rock in a disorienting visual maze. Climbers have recounted mistaking thin ice for solid rock, or perceiving false footholds in patterns of light and shadow. These optical distortions complicate even the simplest maneuvers and add an extra layer of unpredictability to an already lethal environment. Silence dominates between storms, yet even in calm the cliffs seem to hum with latent power, as if the ravine itself monitors every human intrusion. Communication with the outside world becomes unreliable, and climbers often rely solely on instinct and experience to navigate the narrow channels. Even brief moments of stillness carry the weight of anticipation, as though the environment itself is aware of every movement. The combination of extreme height, unpredictable conditions, and the sheer impossibility of rapid rescue creates a tension unlike any other alpine environment in the region. In Huntington Ravine, survival is never guaranteed, and every step upward is a negotiation with a landscape that has claimed more lives than the bravest human courage can tally. The Chernobyl Red Forest, Ukraine. Entry into the Red Forest is forbidden, a zone where invisible forces make even the most experienced search teams turn away, leaving the land to its quiet radioactive desolation. Within this stretch of pine and birch, human absence is total and palpable. Paths once trodden by villagers and cleanup crews are now overgrown, and the air carries a faint metallic tang, the invisible residue of the 1986 nuclear disaster. Protective suits and Geiger counters mark the only allowed presence, yet even scientists admit that the forest dangers are unpredictable, with radiation levels shifting across small distances. For decades, this place has remained off-limits, a silent reminder of a catastrophe that continues to govern life in ways not immediately visible. Crimson needles blanket the ground, their colour a grotesque reminder of the nuclear fire that reshaped this woodland, giving it a surreal and otherworldly appearance. Trees in the centre of the forest retain this unnatural hue, twisted and scorched by the intense radiation exposure, creating a landscape more reminiscent of a painting than reality. The canopy above filters light into a dull, ruddy glow, while the undergrowth is thick with fallen branches and irradiated soil, making each step both perilous and uncertain. Even from the forest edges, the colour appears to shift as the sun moves, giving the illusion that the ground itself is breathing. Soil and water here are laced with radiation, measured in units too small to sense yet potent enough to alter the life forms that attempt to survive within its reach. Scientists have documented spikes in cesium, 137 and strontium-90 that persist decades after the meltdown, seeping through roots and streams. Mushrooms and moss absorb the radiation, while small mammals feeding on these plants carry invisible traces that accumulate over generations. The forest is a living laboratory of mutation, yet each finding emphasizes why no rescue team ventures beyond the monitored paths. The danger is silent, persistent, and impossible to fully control. Despite the danger, wildlife moves cautiously through the trees, some bearing mutations, while others behave in ways that defy the expectations of biologists and visitors alike. Foxes, wild boar, and birds navigate the glowing landscape with uncanny familiarity, unbothered by human absence yet seemingly aware of the invisible hazard. Some animals show unusually large or small forms, fur discolorations and behavioural anomalies that hint at genetic disruption. Predators roam confidently, their prey unafraid, creating a tense, unpredictable ecosystem that seems both natural and unnervingly artificial. The disaster of 1986 left an indelible mark, forcing the evacuation of Pripyat and surrounding settlements and transforming familiar landscapes into territories that search teams refused to traverse. Buildings were abandoned mid-use, roads left to crumble, and the radioactive plume contaminated forests for kilometres. Cleanup crews, known as liquidators, attempted to manage the fallout, yet even decades later, the area remains inhospitable. Each metre into the Red Forest reminds visitors that the disaster was not just a moment in time, but a transformation of an entire biome, one that retains lethal force in invisible ways. Rusting vehicles and collapsed rooftops scatter through the forest's edges, remnants of a human presence abruptly abandoned and slowly surrendering to decay. Military trucks, protective gear, and even personal belongings lie half buried under needles and soil, corroded but hauntingly present. These artifacts speak of urgency, fear, and the impossibility of return, adding layers of human story to the forest's eerie silence. Walking past them, it is impossible to ignore that every object was once tied to life, now withdrawn, leaving only memory imprinted on metal and timber. Researchers who enter the zone under strict protocols report an unsettling quiet, punctuated by the strange behaviours of flora and fauna that have adapted to radiation over decades. Measuring radiation, observing wildlife, and monitoring plant growth are all done with extreme caution. Yet scientists describe a feeling of being watched, or at least that the forest exists on its own terms. Light flickers differently through the crimson canopy, sounds carry oddly, and compasses can occasionally fail. These anomalies are minor compared to the invisible threat, yet they compound a sense that the forest resists human understanding and intervention. Those who have spent even a brief time in the forest speak of a creeping disorientation, as if the very air alters perception and instinct becomes the only reliable guide. Trails can loop inexplicably, landmarks appear and disappear, and the forest can seem both smaller and larger than its actual dimensions. Even trained geologists and biologists admit that the feeling of unease is immediate and persistent. It is not merely fear of radiation, it is the psychological effect of entering a space where the environment itself defies expectations, and the rules of life and death are distorted. Equipment left behind in past expeditions, half buried in undergrowth, suggests attempts at rescue or study that ended with hasty retreats or unexplained disappearances. Cameras, Geiger counters, and crates of supplies lie in rusted heaps, sometimes marked with caution tape long since faded. Some instruments recorded alarming spikes, others simply vanished, leaving only speculation. The forest absorbs these objects, reclaiming them, and their presence serves as a ghostly warning. Even modern technology offers no guarantee in a place shaped by forces beyond human control. Local lore has grown alongside scientific observation, tales of spirits or unseen watchers lending the Red Forest a reputation that mixes fact with fear in the human imagination. Villagers from nearby settlements speak of sudden chills, whispers, and the feeling of being followed by unseen presences. Urban legends describe people vanishing or encountering strange lights among the crimson trees. While scientists dismiss the supernatural claims, the tales reflect the same truth. The forest remains unpredictable, inhospitable, and profoundly alien to human presence. Even in the middle of the day, the canopy casts long, unnatural shadows, and the silence feels almost intentional, as though the forest itself observes every cautious step taken within its bounds. No wind stirs the needles, no bird calls break the hush. Movement feels amplified, and the slightest noise echoes unnaturally through the trees. Visitors speak of the oppressive weight of the atmosphere, as if time itself slows and the forest stretches human perception to its limits. The Red Forest is alive in its own way, indifferent to human curiosity and unforgiving of mistakes. The Red Forest endures as a monument to invisible forces, where every shadow, every rustle, and every abandoned object whispers that some places are meant to remain untrodden, holding their secrets in radioactive stillness. The Tsingy de Bemaraha, Madagascar. The Tsingy de Bemaraha, a limestone labyrinth spanning more than 150,000 hectares in western Madagascar, is notorious among rescue teams for the dangers it conceals. Jagged pinnacles rise like frozen waves of stone, their razor-sharp edges forming a maze that even experienced guides approach with extreme caution. Reports from local authorities and explorers detail instances where hikers and adventurers have vanished, leaving no trace of their presence. Search teams, when dispatched, often halt operations at the peripheries of these formations, acknowledging that entry into the stone forest is perilous, both physically and inexplicably, for anyone who loses their footing or sense of direction. Dense forests cloak the base of the Tsingy, where limestone needles pierce the canopy and sunlight barely touches the floor. The karst landscape, sculpted over millions of years, creates hidden crevices and vertical chasms that have claimed equipment and lives alike. Documented cases reveal that individuals can disappear in the span of minutes, even when companions are nearby, and often without a sound. Local conservation authorities have reinforced access restrictions in certain zones, citing not only the risk of physical injury, but also the unusual disappearance patterns that have baffled rescue teams and defied conventional tracking methods. The topography itself amplifies the hazards. Some of the tallest pinnacles reach over 70 meters, and the limestone forms natural corridors that shift perception and orientation. Explorers describe corridors where echoes return strangely or not at all, disorienting those who attempt to navigate the maze. Rescue teams note that even modern mapping tools are limited. GPS signals weaken among the towering spires, and mobile networks fail. These factors compound the difficulty of search operations, and reports suggest that individuals may inadvertently fall into hidden fissures or crevices that are nearly invisible from above, leaving no recoverable trace. Local guides recount cases in which hikers vanished while following well-trodden paths, sometimes leaving behind personal items carefully arranged rather than abandoned in panic. Such anomalies perplex search teams, as these artifacts suggest conscious movement rather than accidental slips. Madagascar's unique fauna and flora, thriving in the microhabitats between the limestone spires, add another layer of complication. Narrow passages between the rocks conceal endemic lemurs, birds, and reptiles, and rescuers must navigate carefully to avoid disturbing these fragile ecosystems, which could be fatal if misjudged in a crisis. The Tsingy's name itself, meaning where one cannot walk barefoot in the Malagasy language, hints at its lethal sharpness. Documented geological surveys show that the limestone pinnacles are brittle and interspersed with vertical shafts that reach deep underground. Explorers' testimonies describe scenarios where a person could vanish from sight within moments, seemingly absorbed into the stone forest. Rescue teams are trained to consider the structural instability of the pinnacles, as well as environmental hazards such as sudden rain, which transforms narrow paths into slick and impassable channels, further increasing the likelihood that individuals may disappear without warning. Historical records from French colonial expeditions in the 20th century reference disappearances within the Tsingy, though documentation is often scarce due to the treacherous terrain. Missionaries and explorers described being unable to follow missing parties into the most intricate spires, citing both physical danger and a growing sense of disorientation. Modern park authorities echo these accounts, noting that even experienced climbers equipped with ropes, harnesses, and protective gear have been unable to trace lost individuals. The area's isolated nature and dense labyrinthine formations ensure that the stone forest remains largely inaccessible for traditional rescue operations. The ecology of the Tsingy compounds the sense of unease. Narrow suspension bridges connect sections of the spires, but sudden wind gusts can sway them dangerously, and rescue teams have reported tools and supplies slipping into unseen crevices, never to be recovered. The combination of brittle rock, sheer drops, and concealed voids creates a natural trap for anyone entering the pinnacles without intimate knowledge of the terrain. Anthropologists studying the region note that local communities treat the area with reverence and caution, warning that certain zones are cursed or spiritually protected, an acknowledgement of the high incidence of disappearances in those sectors. Scientific expeditions attempting to survey the area in detail often encounter unexpected obstacles. Vertical shafts can reach depths of 30 meters or more, and limestone overhangs create blind spots where a person could vanish without leaving detectable footprints. Rescue teams have reported situations where victims' trails appear to end abruptly at the edge of a pinnacle, as if the individual simply evaporated from the surface of the earth. These occurrences, coupled with the Tsingyi's labyrinthine complexity, mean that even with modern technology, comprehensive searches can be both logistically impossible and psychologically draining for those involved. The psychological impact on search teams is significant. Guides and rescuers recount feelings of vertigo, unease, and disorientation that worsen in the heart of the pinnacles. Time perception may shift amid the towering rocks, with some explorers reporting hours passing in what felt like minutes, or sudden light changes that make it difficult to gauge distance. Experts studying these reports suggest that the combination of natural optical illusions, echoing sounds, and environmental stress may influence both perception and behaviour, creating situations where lost individuals appear to vanish inexplicably, challenging conventional rescue strategies. Local conservation efforts have further complicated access. Certain regions of the Tsingy de Bemaraha are designated UNESCO World Heritage Sites, where strict preservation laws limit human intrusion. These restrictions not only protect endangered wildlife and rare plants, but also restrict the ability of rescue teams to conduct extensive searches. Park authorities acknowledge that once someone enters the more remote sectors, the likelihood of recovery diminishes rapidly, especially if they deviate from marked trails. Such realities have forced rescuers to make the difficult decision to prioritize safety over pursuit in zones with high disappearance risk. Despite meticulous preparation, maps, and guides, the Tsingy continues to claim those who venture too deeply. Researchers and explorers alike have concluded that some sections of the labyrinth resist all attempts at exploration, as if the stone formations themselves actively obscure human presence. The combination of treacherous terrain, unpredictable microclimates, and untraceable voids ensures that those who disappear within the Tsingy remain beyond reach, an enduring mystery at the edge of human comprehension. Even decades later, the spires of the Tsingy stand silent, indifferent, and infinitely sharp, guarding secrets no rescue team has ever fully uncovered. Bennington Triangle, Vermont, USA. In the shadowed hills of southwestern Vermont, a quiet stretch of forested terrain has long been avoided by search teams after a series of disappearances defied explanation. Locals speak of a zone encompassing Glastonbury Mountain and its surrounding valleys, where travellers entering alone or in pairs sometimes vanish without a trace. Newspaper reports from the mid-20th century chronicled these events with a mix of alarm and confusion, noting that the terrain appeared ordinary and the weather often mild at the time of disappearances. Authorities and volunteers alike approached the region warily, aware that standard search procedures often ended in baffling failure. Winter winds whip through narrow valleys, blanketing roads and trails with snow that quickly erases footprints, leaving even the most experienced trackers disoriented. Dense evergreens crowd the hillsides, forming a canopy that muffles sound and distorts distance. Streams and shallow ravines cut unexpected paths through the forest floor, and the uneven ground is easily obscured under frost or ice. Searchers recount that conditions can change abruptly from clear skies to dense fog within minutes, obscuring landmarks. These environmental challenges amplify the region's natural isolation, creating an unsettling atmosphere where even minor errors can lead a person to vanish from sight. Between 1945 and 1950, residents documented multiple vanishings, including college student Pauline Weldon, who disappeared while hiking a well-trodden path, and postal worker James Tedford, last seen leaving Bennington in winter conditions. Eyewitness testimony, preserved in newspapers and police reports, described both cases as ordinary departures that became inexplicable when individuals never arrived at their intended destinations. Local law enforcement and volunteers combed the area extensively, but their efforts consistently failed to produce physical evidence or reliable leads. The clustering of these incidents, along with similar events in nearby townships, would later give rise to the term Bennington Triangle. Authorities often face the frustrating limits of their own resources, combing dense forests with dogs, lanterns and snowshoes, only to find trails that seem to vanish abruptly. Search grids expanded into adjacent valleys, and every ridge and hollow was mapped and re-examined, yet no consistent pattern emerged. Teams sometimes encountered items left behind, a hat, a scarf, a backpack, but no trace of the missing individuals themselves. Logs from these missions note repeated disorientation among searchers, and in some cases volunteers reported sensing a sudden, inexplicable shift in the forest's atmosphere that made navigation increasingly difficult. Families and volunteers reported a creeping unease as hours stretched into days, with searchers describing moments of vertigo and inexplicable confusion while navigating familiar paths. Communities spoke of the quiet that would descend over the woods, a stillness that seemed almost deliberate in its intensity. Even seasoned hikers, accustomed to Vermont's rugged hills, confessed to a growing sense of paranoia and uncertainty in the areas where disappearances occurred. The psychological toll was compounded by the lack of closure, leaving rescuers and loved ones alike with lingering questions and a persistent sense that something about the triangle was actively hostile or impenetrable. Witnesses occasionally spoke of sudden fog banks or strange, low murmurs in the woods that appeared to precede the disappearance of hikers or hunters. Hunters recounted that visibility would drop unexpectedly, with mist swirling around tree trunks and the forest floor in patterns that defied wind or terrain. Some described soft, indistinct sounds that seemed to follow them along trails, vanishing when approached. Though these accounts were never scientifically verified, search teams took them seriously as potential indicators of environmental hazards or psychological phenomena affecting lost individuals, adding another layer of caution to rescue strategies. The term Bennington Triangle first appeared in newspapers decades later, summarising the concentration of baffling cases clustered around Glastonbury Mountain and surrounding townships. Investigative articles highlighted the unusual frequency of disappearances compared to surrounding areas, drawing attention from amateur researchers and folklorists. Historical accounts emphasised that the events shared a disquieting pattern. Victims were often familiar with the region, travelling on routine errands or hikes, yet vanished inexplicably, leaving behind belongings or personal effects untouched. The phrase became a shorthand for a zone in which conventional logic seemed suspended, a place where both human and environmental factors conspired to confound understanding. Even modern rescue teams approach the area with caution, relying on GPS devices and aerial surveys, yet acknowledging that many sectors remain effectively unsearchable under Vermont's dense canopy. Technological advances have improved mapping and communication, but dense conifers and rugged terrain continue to obscure precise locations. Helicopters cannot hover close to every valley floor, and foot patrols remain vulnerable to the same disorientation that confounded earlier searches. Teams report that areas long associated with disappearances are still avoided unless necessary, a tacit recognition that the forest itself resists human intervention, and that some zones may remain inaccessible indefinitely. Some locals recall fleeting glimpses of individuals in fields or forest edges, only for them to vanish when approached, leaving possessions or clothing mysteriously behind. A farmer near Glastonbury Mountain once described seeing a figure standing by a fence in twilight, only for it to vanish when he moved closer, leaving a jacket draped over a fence post. Hikers report similar incidents, and while none can be fully verified, the consistency of these reports contributes to the triangle's enduring mystique. Search teams consider these sightings as anecdotal evidence of either extreme misperception or a phenomenon beyond current understanding, further complicating rescue efforts. Speculation has ranged from extreme weather anomalies to spatial disorientation, yet no single explanation fully accounts for the patterns of vanishings that continue to mystify investigators. Theories have included sudden snowstorms, hidden ravines, and even psychological effects caused by isolation, but none consistently align with the documented timelines. Environmental experts note that the dense mixed forests and topographic variety can produce confusing visual cues, yet the abrupt disappearance of multiple otherwise competent individuals suggests additional factors are at play. The combination of history, terrain, and inexplicable human loss ensures that the Bennington Triangle retains its unsettling reputation. After years of observation and repeated searches, the forests of the Bennington Triangle remain unyielding, compelling rescuers to withdraw when conditions exceed a threshold of danger or uncertainty. Even experienced teams recognise that there is no guarantee of recovery, and that the area's reputation is grounded in decades of perplexing evidence rather than rumour. Each operation reinforces the sense that some section of the forest, though ordinary in appearance, conceal patterns of disappearance that defy conventional understanding, leaving both investigators and the public with questions that remain unanswered to this day. In the silent Vermont woods, it seems that those who vanish may linger just beyond sight, caught between the familiar and a place no human has fully mapped or understood. Mount Kailash, Tibet Autonomous Region. The puzzling disappearances of pilgrims and trekkers around Mount Kailash have repeatedly forced search teams to abandon missions, leaving behind unanswered questions and incomplete reports. Documented accounts describe individuals vanishing while performing the Kora, a sacred circumambulation of the peak or during attempts to ascend lower ridges, with no footprints or signs of struggle left behind. Authorities and expedition leaders have repeatedly emphasized that even well-prepared groups are vulnerable to sudden, inexplicable incidents. The combination of extreme altitude, spiritual reverence, and environmental unpredictability has created zones that rescuers treat with caution, aware that conventional search methods often fail. Jagged glaciers and ice-clad ridges stretch across the slopes, and the summit rises 6,638 meters above sea level. where oxygen is dangerously thin and sudden storms appear without warning. Snowfields and crevassed glaciers form an uneven, treacherous network across the mountain, making every step perilous. The thin air magnifies fatigue and slows judgment, while hidden ice channels and brittle rock create hazards even for skilled climbers. Search teams report that the terrain is physically punishing to such a degree that any delay or misstep can prove fatal, and efforts to locate missing persons are frequently suspended well before reaching the upper reaches of the mountain. Expedition records detail sudden bouts of nausea, disorientation, and exhaustion that overwhelmed even experienced climbers, sometimes hours from the base. In several documented cases, trekkers or pilgrims halted unexpectedly, reporting feelings of vertigo, intense headaches, or a sense of being off balance and were never seen again. Hypoxia at high altitude can intensify these symptoms, yet rescuers note that disappearances occasionally occur under conditions that should have been manageable, suggesting additional unexplainable factors. These patterns have reinforced the mountain's reputation as a site where human endurance meets unpredictable forces that are only partially understood. Revered across multiple faiths, Mount Kailash draws devotees who undertake the Kora, a journey that challenges both spiritual devotion and physical resilience. Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, and Bon pilgrims consider the mountain sacred, and circumnavigating it is believed to cleanse sin and earn spiritual merit. Paths used by centuries of worshippers often traverse glaciers, rocky outcrops, and steep ridges. The convergence of human ritual with extreme terrain creates situations where rescuers must consider both the physical safety of pilgrims and the cultural significance of their presence, further complicating attempts to intervene when individuals go missing. Altitude sickness, hypothermia, and unpredictable blizzards have repeatedly made certain zones inaccessible, compelling search teams to halt operations despite visible tracks or calls for assistance. Rapid weather changes at high altitude can trap climbers in sudden snowstorms or sub-zero conditions, sometimes for hours. Even small shifts in wind or temperature can produce whiteouts, obscuring trail markers and collapsing the sense of direction. Rescue teams often retreat once these thresholds are reached, acknowledging that entering the upper reaches without specialized support and timing can result in additional casualties, turning rescues into perilous gambles. Reports indicate that equipment, tents, and supplies often remain undisturbed, yet individuals can vanish entirely, leaving rescuers bewildered by the absence of footprints or signs of struggle. Cases documented by expedition logs reveal abandoned climbing gear perfectly arranged or undisturbed prayer flags fluttering in the wind, with no trace of the person who set them. These anomalies suggest movement or disappearance under circumstances that defy ordinary explanation. Search teams acknowledge that such incidents heighten anxiety, as the visible evidence of human presence persists even when the individual themselves has inexplicably vanished from the mountain. Isolation defines the region, with settlements hours or days away by foot and radio communications frequently disrupted, rendering search coordination sporadic at best. The nearest towns are often at altitudes thousands of meters lower, connected by roads that are impassable during winter or monsoon seasons. Helicopter support is limited by thin air and unpredictable weather, while mobile signals are intermittent or non-existent. These logistical constraints force rescuers to make difficult decisions about where and when to conduct operations, often retreating from areas where missing persons might have survived for only hours. Historical expeditions, including documented 20th century attempts to survey and climb the peak, frequently ended in failure or unexplained health collapses among team members. Early mountaineers reported sudden fatigue, loss of coordination, or unaccountable drops in body temperature that forced retreats. Journals describe moments when companions lost track of each other in clear weather, suggesting that environmental or perceptual factors contributed to disorientation. These historical accounts, combined with modern expedition reports, demonstrate that Mount Kailash consistently challenges the assumptions of climbers and rescuers alike, blending extreme physical conditions with unpredictable human vulnerability. Optical illusions in snow and ice, sudden whiteouts, and concealed crevasses can mislead even skilled climbers, magnifying the danger and mystery that the mountain embodies. Sunlight reflecting off glaciers creates mirages that distort distance and depth perception, while shadows cast by jagged ridges may hide dangerous drops. Avalanches and shifting ice can occur without warning, erasing evidence of human passage. Rescue teams often emphasize that these hazards are compounded by high-altitude fatigue, meaning that a momentary lapse can result in disappearance, leaving no trace for those attempting to follow or locate missing climbers. Human perception at extreme altitude becomes unreliable, with reports of hallucinations, distorted time, and sudden exhaustion that blur the line between conscious action and instinctive survival. Climbers describe feelings of being watched, phantom sounds, or visual anomalies, phenomena attributed to hypoxia or sensory misalignment, but often coinciding with actual disappearances. These effects, combined with treacherous terrain and severe weather, make search operations exceptionally difficult. Experts suggest that a missing individual may simply vanish within minutes, even if all standard safety protocols are followed, reinforcing Mount Kailash's reputation as a peak where ordinary understanding of time, space, and survival is challenged. The intertwining of sacred reverence, extreme environment, and inexplicable disappearance ensures that Mount Kailash remains a peak even the most determined rescuers approach with caution and restraint. Pilgrims continue to circle the mountain, hikers continue to attempt ascents, and yet search teams maintain strict limits on areas they are willing to explore. The combination of high altitude, spiritual significance, and documented disappearances creates a persistent and multifaceted enigma that blurs the line between human endurance and forces beyond comprehension, leaving the mountain's dangers both visible and elusive. Those who vanish on Kailash are said to disappear not merely from sight, but into a space where the mountain itself seems to govern time, weather, and fate. The Black Forest High Moors, Germany. Within the high moors, countless travellers have reported missing hours and impossible displacements, baffling even the most methodical searchers. Local authorities and historical accounts describe hikers and researchers returning far from their intended paths, sometimes disoriented or unable to explain how they moved across the bogs. Search parties entering the moors quickly find that footprints vanish into spongy peat and shallow pools, while soft ridges can collapse without warning. These repeated anomalies have led rescue teams to approach the high moors with extreme caution, often abandoning missions when the terrain becomes too unpredictable, leaving behind lingering questions that no report can fully resolve. Beneath the surface, pockets of spongy peat and hidden pools create hazards that can mislead footsteps and erase any trace of passage. A hiker stepping on firm-looking moss may sink into waist-deep peat, while invisible water channels can sweep gear and clothing away. Even trained personnel quickly learn that visible paths are unreliable guides, and that any deviation may carry travellers into sections from which return is uncertain. The deceptive firmness of the ground, coupled with bog gases that rise unpredictably from decaying peat, makes the high moors a place where conventional tracking and rescue techniques frequently fail. Certain plants and subtle ecological quirks seem to interfere with perception, making the moorland feel alive to those who traverse it. Carnivorous sundews, sphagnum mosses, and clumps of bog cotton obscure depressions, while methane pockets rising from the peat can induce dizziness or nausea. Wildlife, from deer to elusive birds, moves silently among these features, not indicating danger. Even the most experienced navigators report a sense of being subtly guided or deflected by the landscape, reinforcing the notion that the high moors operate by rules that defy ordinary human understanding. Individuals sometimes reappear far from their original path, unable to recall the route they must have taken or the time that passed. Documented cases include hikers appearing on ridges hours away from their last known location, with no footprints bridging the distance. Some return with personal items missing or strangely relocated, while others cannot remember how they traversed bogs and pools that would normally require hours of careful travel. These anomalies suggest that the moors can distort both spatial and temporal perception, creating a zone where human logic and ordinary measures of distance lose meaning entirely. A thick, shifting fog combined with muffled sounds and shifting shadows can warp the senses, turning familiar terrain into a disorienting maze. Even landmarks previously memorized for navigation may vanish in the low-hanging mist, or reflections from shallow pools create optical illusions. Travelers often report hearing footsteps or whispered voices just beyond sight, leading to abrupt changes in directional panic. Rescue teams note that environmental conditions can amplify fatigue and disorientation, compounding the danger of disappearing into the bogs, where each step carries uncertainty. Explorers from past centuries describe sudden dizziness, freezing fatigue or confusion that forced retreat, contributing to the high moor's enduring reputation. 19th and 20th century accounts frequently mention hikers who became immobilized for hours, only to regain coherence in places distant from their original path. Journals record lost companions, vanished gear, and incomplete attempts at rescue, showing that even with knowledge of the terrain, misadventure remains likely. These historical incidents underscore that the high moors are not only physically challenging, but also psychologically unsettling, with the environment itself playing an unpredictable role. Analysis of repeated incidents shows specific depressions, moss-covered hummocks, and waterlogged sections often correlate with disappearances. Researchers have mapped high-risk zones where vanishings tend to cluster, though no precise pattern explains why individuals enter one area and not another. Some depressions, almost invisible from above, act like natural traps, while others seem to disorient travelers through subtle shifts in footing or horizon lines. This mixture of observable hazard and inexplicable movement has convinced rescuers that conventional logic cannot fully account for the high moor's effects on human behaviour. Rescuers admit that even advanced equipment like GPS, drones, and infrared imaging can fail to locate lost individuals in the deceptive landscape. Drone footage may reveal pools or ridges, but it cannot capture sudden changes in perception experienced by travellers on foot. GPS signals may fluctuate in fog, and thermal readings can be obscured by saturated peat. Even highly trained personnel report feeling unmoored while surveying the area, as though the landscape resists observation. These technological limitations make deep searches highly risky and often compel teams to withdraw before the full extent of the terrain can be examined. Folkloric accounts suggest unseen currents or subtle forces guide travellers off course, making ordinary navigation unreliable and unsettling. Local stories speak of hikers wandering for hours, hearing distant calls or footsteps that vanish upon approach. Residents speak of areas where time seems to stretch, contract, or repeat, giving rise to myths about invisible currents within the bogs. While such tales cannot be verified scientifically, they coincide with documented disappearances and reinforce the reputation of the moors as a place where natural hazards intertwine with inexplicable phenomena. Technological interventions frequently yield incomplete results, as the moor's surface and local atmospheric conditions obscure both sight and instruments. Even when teams combine mapping, aerial observation, and ground patrols, the soft peat, hidden depressions, and foggy conditions prevent full coverage. Repeat searches have demonstrated that missing persons may remain undetected for hours or even days, sometimes re-emerging far from the expected location. This persistent elusiveness underscores why rescuers approach the high moors with caution, treating it as a domain that respects neither human planning nor conventional understanding of time and space. The intersection of time anomalies, environmental hazards, and human perception ensures that the high moors remain one of Europe's most enigmatic and perilous landscapes. Those who enter must contend with disorientation, physical instability, and subtle ecological hazards, knowing that even meticulous preparation cannot guarantee safety. Rescue teams rely on experience, local knowledge, and careful limits, but the moor's combination of bog, mist, and perceptual distortions keeps disappearance a constant risk. This convergence of factors creates a zone in which vanishings are not isolated incidents, but an enduring feature of the landscape itself. The peatlands stretch in endless silence, and even the wind seems to hesitate before crossing their edges. The Picos de Europa sinkholes, Spain. The sinkholes of the Picos de Europa have earned a reputation few dare to challenge, as rescuers are warned against descending into shafts where past explorers have simply vanished. Vertical drops open abruptly beneath narrow ledges, and even experienced cavers are cautioned to approach only with extreme care. Reports of missing individuals, sometimes with their equipment left intact, have reinforced the perception that these natural chasms are not merely dangerous, they are unpredictable traps. Every descent is fraught with uncertainty, and those who venture too far often encounter conditions so extreme that continuing the search is considered more hazardous than abandoning it. Towering limestone cliffs give way to hidden caverns, their sheer verticality leaving even experienced cavers cautious of each precarious step. The walls of these karst formations rise sharply, with jagged edges and fragile overhangs that can crumble without warning. Stalactites hang like frozen daggers above narrow ledges, and small rockfalls are common even in dry weather. Some shafts open into narrow chimneys barely wide enough for a climber to pass, requiring rope work under conditions where miscalculation can be fatal. The combination of height, instability, and enclosed space makes each movement deliberate and tense. Accounts from early expeditions describe climbers and speleologists disappearing from rope-secured entrances, their equipment sometimes left intact, baffling those nearby. Explorers report entering a shaft for only a few meters before encountering sudden voids too deep to gauge, and those who descend further occasionally vanish from view entirely. Observers on the rim note the silence that follows, with no sound of activity or struggle echoing back. These vanishings occur despite careful preparation and the presence of multiple team members, underscoring that the Picos de Europa sinkholes possess dangers beyond ordinary measurement. Observers have long learned that loose rock, narrow passages, and the risk of sudden collapse make conventional intervention nearly impossible. Even with modern caving techniques, descending into the deeper shafts can be fatal if a single anchor point fails. The limestone often flakes unpredictably, and narrow ledges may give way under the weight of a human body. Teams that attempt to rig safety lines frequently retreat before reaching the bottom, as any misstep could trigger a fall of debris or a rope failure. The inherent instability ensures that search operations are routinely suspended. Early 20th century speleological surveys detail repeated retreats, as cavers confronted chambers that widened unexpectedly or plunged into deeper, uncharted voids. Explorers described encountering multiple branching cavities that seemed to extend for hundreds of meters with no clear exit. Vertical shafts often lead to smaller pits, creating labyrinthine passages where light and sound are quickly absorbed. Some expeditions reported faint airflow that suggested other openings, yet no further entry could be safely attempted. These historical accounts have reinforced the sinkhole's reputation as zones where human endeavour meets unyielding natural architecture. Hidden within the limestone, subterranean rivers carve channels that can swallow water and objects with startling speed, vanishing into unseen caverns. These waterways, often only a few inches wide at the surface but plunging into expansive underground passages, create sudden currents capable of dragging ropes or gear into darkness. Seasonal snowmelt and rainfall dramatically alter flow patterns, making some shafts treacherously slippery or partially flooded without warning. The sound of rushing water echoes unpredictably, masking depth and direction, and many explorers have underestimated these currents, discovering too late that they flow toward vertical drops impossible to traverse. The air within the shafts carries a biting chill, and sounds echo strangely, creating the sensation that the cavern itself is alive with movement. Wind currents funnel through narrow chimneys, generating unexpected whistling or whooshing noises. Footsteps and falling pebbles reverberate unpredictably, making it difficult to locate a source. The cold, damp air penetrates clothing, sapping energy and clarity, while darkness closes in rapidly even during daylight hours. Explorers often describe the oppressive stillness as heavier than silence, a tangible presence that heightens caution and anxiety in equal measure. Certain vertical chimneys and hidden crevices defy expectations, with unexplored cavities branching off into darkness that even modern equipment cannot illuminate. Some holes plunge at angles impossible to measure without advanced surveying, while others twist back on themselves, forming loops invisible from above. Speleologists have noted air pressure changes and faint drafts that indicate subterranean chambers not yet mapped. The constant unpredictability of these formations forces explorers to proceed with extreme care, often halting further exploration altogether until conditions can be reassessed. Anchors fail without warning, and ropes swing over hollow voids, emphasizing that no preparation guarantees safety against the sheer unpredictability of these sinkholes. A single miscalculation can send a climber plummeting, even in the presence of backup lines. Rocks loosen unexpectedly, and dislodged debris can ricochet along walls or fall into deeper pits. Teams attempting to descend must constantly reassess the reliability of every anchor and foothold, yet the karst's unstable nature offers no assurance. The potential for catastrophe has made professional rescue nearly impossible, as no standard safety protocol can fully mitigate the risks. Teams sent to inspect the deeper shafts report a creeping claustrophobia, vertigo, and a gnawing sense of isolation that few endure for long. Confined spaces amplify every sound, and echoes sometimes produce the impression of movement or unseen presence. Climbers describe the psychological strain of peering into near-total darkness, where rope and rock define the only sense of orientation. Even seasoned explorers admit that fear of falling, becoming trapped, or misjudging depth creates a constant mental pressure, one that amplifies with every meter descended. Many retreats occur not from physical exhaustion, but from the mind's response to the relentless vertical void. Echoes sometimes suggest motion where none is visible, and faint drafts can chill the air unnaturally, hinting at subterranean passages whose true extent is unknowable. Instruments and mapping tools often fail to capture the complete layout of the shafts, leaving gaps in understanding that may hide further dangers. Explorers occasionally report glimpses of reflective rock surfaces or water pools that seem impossible to access. These anomalies are neither illusions nor optical tricks, yet their origin and nature remain unexplained, reinforcing the sense that the sinkholes guard secrets beyond human reach. The combination of vertical complexity, unstable stone, and the long history of untraceable disappearances ensures that these sinkholes remain places even the most daring rescuers refuse to enter. Every descent requires careful calculation, multiple safety redundancies, and acceptance of risk that few are willing to bear. Past expeditions demonstrate that preparation cannot overcome the cast's inherent unpredictability. Even modern technology and specialized equipment provide only partial reassurance, leaving these shafts as natural enigmas where human intervention is limited by design and circumstance. Darkness folds endlessly into the limestone depths, and each shaft seems to guard a secret that no hand, rope, or light can ever fully reach. Kalaallit, Nunat Ice Sheet, margins Greenland. Silence spreads across the horizon as explorers step cautiously toward the shifting ice, aware that search teams rarely venture into these margins. The sheer scale is overwhelming, with pale blue ridges and glacial tongues stretching beyond sight, yet danger hides in forms almost imperceptible. Even seasoned expeditions approach with hesitation, knowing that the ice can swallow people, vehicles, and equipment without a trace. Each step demands focus, and every glance is measured because the frozen surface is far from constant, and small errors can have immediate, irreversible consequences. Crevasses form and shift beneath the surface, revealing channels carved by meltwater over centuries. Seracs rise unpredictably above deep fissures, their massive faces prone to sudden collapse, while moulins funnel meltwater down vertical shafts, producing sounds that echo like distant thunder. Subtle vibrations can hint at ice movement, but they rarely predict the sudden appearance of voids hidden under snow. Meltwater surges can rapidly destabilize nearby ridges, and ice quakes, vibrations within the glacier, can make even well-planned steps treacherous, reminding explorers that this is a living, moving landscape. Tracks vanish within hours, swallowed by drifting snow, shifting ice, and sublimation. Footprints, tire marks, and tent outlines can disappear completely under fresh layers or as sheets of ice slide imperceptibly. Vehicles that seem secure may slip into hidden crevasses, and supplies left on the surface often vanish as the terrain subtly shifts. Even carefully plotted paths fail to remain reliable, leaving those who follow to navigate a terrain that erases human presence almost as soon as it appears. Every ridge and snow bridge hides a concealed threat, capable of collapsing without warning. Seasonal melting weakens surfaces, and frost or microfractures can cause ice to fail under minimal weight. Teams have described standing on seemingly solid snow, only to feel vibrations and cracking that force immediate retreat. These micro-events occur unpredictably, and their presence makes any attempt to reach certain margins perilous. Even a single misjudged step can have catastrophic consequences, which is why rescue missions are seldom attempted. Remote monitoring stations reveal subtle shifts in the ice, showing movements faster than initially anticipated. Satellite imagery and GPS readings indicate that entire sections can slide or rotate slightly, moving objects and tents without leaving visible traces. Crevasses open and close suddenly, and meltwater tunnels undermine surfaces from below. These observations illustrate both the ice's complexity and the futility of human intervention, reinforcing why even the most sophisticated teams hesitate to penetrate these margins. Moulins and hidden ice caves carve unpredictable networks beneath the surface, shaping the landscape in ways that are invisible to even the most experienced teams. These natural features channel meltwater at extraordinary speeds, sometimes redirecting entire surface streams within hours. Explorers have reported sudden drops into concealed cavities when snow bridges collapse, and small ice quakes can shift debris or equipment without warning. Some cavities extend for hundreds of meters, yet are covered by deceptively solid snow, giving the illusion of safety. Satellite surveys and ground-penetrating radar have revealed the scale of these hidden formations, showing that the ice sheet behaves as a dynamic, constantly evolving system, far beyond what surface observations alone can indicate. Wind slices across the frozen expanse, and sunlight reflects off crystalline surfaces, blinding and disorienting anyone exposed. The glare can conceal subtle undulations or thin snow bridges over deep fissures. Gusts carry fine ice particles across open areas, while the silence between blasts amplifies every sound. Explorers describe the environment as alien, where distances and contours are difficult to judge, and perception can fail in seconds. Even the act of pausing to observe carries risk, as the ice shifts almost imperceptibly beneath one's feet. A single misstep can transform the terrain in an instant, leaving previously safe paths suddenly impassable. Snow drifts accumulate unevenly, ice shifts imperceptibly, and fissures widen without warning. Teams have reported routes disappearing while navigating, forcing detours that test both skill and nerve. The glacier behaves almost like a sentient entity, subtly altering conditions in ways no map can capture. These experiences reinforce the sense that certainty is fleeting, and careful preparation offers only a fragile illusion of control. Cold penetrates layers of clothing, exhaustion comes quickly, and the mind strains to maintain focus. Hypothermia can develop despite careful insulation, and the relentless glare, wind, and shifting ice wear down attention. The psychological pressure of traversing a landscape that changes beneath one's feet combines with physical hazards to create an environment few can endure for long. Even highly trained teams often retreat well before reaching the most dangerous sections, recognizing that continuing may be fatal. Pools of meltwater can appear suddenly, and ice fractures emit faint, unsettling sounds that seem to come from nowhere. Explorers sometimes hear ice creaking or humming, a natural phenomenon, yet unnerving in its unpredictability. Occasionally, objects left behind reappear far from where they were placed, suggesting movement within the ice that defies visible explanation. These anomalies are factual yet eerie, reinforcing the notion that the glacier is not a static terrain but a shifting, unknowable environment that conceals more than it reveals. Even the most experienced teams eventually halt, calculating that the risks outweigh any potential gain. Maps, GPS, and satellite imagery are insufficient to detect all hazards, and human perception can be misleading in the uniform white landscape. Historical incidents have shown that entering these margins often results in further loss rather than recovery. The combination of shifting ice, hidden crevasses, meltwater, and microfractures ensures that these areas remain places where search efforts are rarely attempted and survival is never guaranteed. The glacier extends without end, its surface continuously reshaping itself in imperceptible ways that frustrate human observation. The ice hides channels, voids, and shifting layers, erasing signs of human activity and reminding anyone who ventures near of their own vulnerability. This is a place where knowledge and technology offer only partial protection, and the margin between life and disappearance is as thin and treacherous as the ice itself. White plains ripple with hidden motion, and within their restless surface the glacier guards secrets that no human eye has ever charted. Mount Shasta's upper wilderness, USA. Shadows crawl across the volcanic ridges as the forest swallows the path ahead, and even experienced guides hesitate to enter the upper wilderness. Dense stands of ponderosa pine, fir, and hemlock obscure the trail, while steep volcanic slopes rise abruptly, leaving little room for error. Search teams often refuse to proceed beyond certain elevations, citing both environmental hazards and the repeated disappearance of hikers and climbers. The terrain is deceptive. Ridges appear stable, yet volcanic soil, loose ash, and hidden lava tubes can shift beneath boots. turning every step into a careful negotiation with gravity. Rugged basalt and unstable scree make each step a silent gamble with the mountain itself. Jagged ridges formed from ancient lava flows rise unpredictably and sometimes fracture beneath weight. Small concealed fissures hide pockets of volcanic ash that give way unexpectedly, and residual geothermal activity warms certain soil patches, producing weak surfaces. Even minimal tremors or the movement of water beneath thin soil layers can dislodge rocks or create collapses, leaving rescue teams wary of pressing further. Every ascent demands constant assessment of both the immediate terrain and the surrounding slope's stability. A sudden veil of fog threads through the trees, erasing familiar landmarks and confusing compasses. Light refracts off volcanic ash particles, creating distorted shadows that mislead perception, and wind carries unfamiliar scents that confuse orientation. Temperatures drop rapidly, sometimes producing ice along shaded ridges, while shifting light causes even well-memorized trails to vanish. Teams report that sounds bounce oddly through the forest, with echoes from distant gullies appearing nearby, heightening disorientation. In these conditions, a single misstep can lead rescuers into previously scouted zones they cannot recognize. Historical records tell of hikers disappearing without a trace over decades, often in areas thought to be safe. The Siskiyou County Sheriff's Department and Mount Shasta Rangers have logged dozens of cases where individuals vanished on marked trails, sometimes leaving behind clothing, shoes, or partially packed backpacks. In certain instances, tents remained pitched, ropes coiled, and personal items arranged as if deliberately left behind. These incidents have established a chilling pattern. Even areas frequented by experienced climbers are not immune to sudden vanishings, and teams often interpret them as warnings rather than anomalies. Trail markers fade or appear contradictory beneath dense canopy, challenging even experienced guides. Painted blazes erode under harsh sun and rain, while fallen trees or volcanic debris obscure posts entirely. Natural landmarks, such as rock outcrops or unique tree formations, can appear duplicated due to perspective shifts along slopes, making navigation unreliable. Even GPS units struggle under dense cover or in narrow ravines, while sunlight reflecting off volcanic ash can create false points of reference. Teams must memorize multiple potential routes and continually check bearings, yet mistakes remain common, particularly under fatigue. Fatigue and anxiety weigh heavily on searchers, who speak of time seeming to stretch or compress. Days of uneven climbing, heavy packs, and exposure to windswept slopes accumulate, producing mental exhaustion. Several rangers have noted that searchers sometimes experience disorientation or minor hallucinations, often seeing shapes in fog or shadows that vanish upon approach. The monotony of green canopy, grey rock, and ash-covered soil contributes to cognitive strain, amplifying the psychological effect of isolation. Even short breaks cannot fully restore clarity, leaving teams susceptible to misjudging distances or misreading terrain. Abandoned gear lies in configurations that suggest deliberation rather than accident, confounding retrieval teams. Backpacks sometimes remain upright, sleeping bags folded, or ropes coiled neatly near abrupt cliff edges or on seemingly stable ground. Boots may be left side by side while clothing appears intentionally draped over branches. These arrangements have appeared in multiple documented cases, prompting debate over whether the individuals left voluntarily, succumbed to unseen forces, or were subject to environmental conditions beyond human understanding. The eerie precision of these setups amplifies the wilderness's reputation as a domain that defies normal explanation. Wildlife moves silently, while thick mats of volcanic soil obscure hidden crevices. Black-tailed deer and foxes navigate uneven slopes with ease, often appearing suddenly and disappearing just as quickly, while small mammals slip into concealed hollows. Dense underbrush, poison oak, and fallen trees create natural traps for humans unfamiliar with the terrain. Volcanic soil, layered over ash, can conceal holes and pits formed by past lava flows, leaving explorers at risk of sudden drops. Every step must account for both living creatures and unstable ground, making even simple navigation a potential hazard. Geological surveys reveal sections of unstable soil and sudden slope failures that make rescue nearly impossible. Data from the US Geological Survey and local studies show that upper slopes contain a patchwork of fractured basalt, soft ash, and hidden lava tubes that collapse under weight. Minor tremors or water erosion can dislodge large rocks, alter slope angles and obscure footprints. Rescue teams must contend with these factors alongside dense forest, unpredictable weather, and fog, all while attempting to locate missing individuals in a terrain that shifts subtly yet continuously. Teams withdraw cautiously, deterred by both natural hazards and the inexplicable patterns that emerge in missing person cases. Even with modern mapping, GPS tracking, and coordinated protocols, the upper wilderness presents obstacles that often force early retreat. Searchers recognize that venturing too far may endanger lives, particularly in zones where prior incidents demonstrate unusual disappearances. The combination of steep volcanic slopes, dense forest, shifting soil, fog, and documented disappearances makes intervention highly limited, leaving many missing person cases unresolved despite extensive effort. Upper reaches of the wilderness resist mapping and mastery, leaving only fragments of human presence visible. Scattered tents, partially buried backpacks, and faint footprints offer glimpses of exploration, yet rarely form a coherent narrative. Rescue teams note that patterns seen in prior missions provide little guidance for subsequent efforts, reinforcing the mountain's reputation as a wilderness where human control is minimal. The terrain's unpredictability and the persistent unexplained disappearance of hikers make it a place where mystery dominates over certainty, and where each expedition adds another layer to an already complex story. Veils of vapor curl among the ridges, and within the shadowed folds of forest and lava, the mountain harbours vanishings no searcher has ever explained. The Khamar-Daban Range, Russia. An unbroken line of pine and spruce conceals the scene where a group vanished without warning, leaving even seasoned rescuers hesitant to enter. Local authorities and guides have long warned that certain portions of the Khamar-Daban Range are treacherous in ways that defy conventional explanation. In multiple incidents, hikers or small groups have disappeared almost instantaneously, sometimes leaving belongings in meticulous order, yet never emerging from the forested slopes. Teams called to investigate often retreat after brief attempts, citing not just the ruggedness of the terrain, but a palpable sense that the wilderness itself resists intrusion. The range stretches across southeastern Siberia, its elevations rising sharply and cloaking valleys in a thick taiga that resists easy passage. Snow lingers for much of the year at higher elevations, while lower zones remain dense with moss-covered conifers and tangled underbrush. The taiga floor is strewn with fallen logs and a thick layer of needles, moss, and lichen that muffles sound and hides sudden dips in the terrain, making every step unpredictable. Rivers, swollen by snowmelt or sudden rain, carve erratic paths through ravines, cutting off access and forcing backtracking that can disorient searchers. Maps are limited and, in some areas, conflicting, leaving even experienced guides to rely on instinct and prior knowledge that cannot fully account for sudden obstacles. Reports compiled by regional authorities detail sudden fatalities among hikers, with no external injuries or environmental triggers to explain them. In several recorded cases, individuals succumbed during calm weather, without signs of slips, falls, or animal attacks. Between 1990 and 2015, regional records note more than a dozen unexplained vanishings, often involving hikers with prior experience in Siberian forests. Emergency teams frequently find equipment abandoned nearby, as though those missing had paused before vanishing entirely. These anomalies have been corroborated by multiple sources, including ranger logs, local news archives, and interviews with surviving companions, forming a pattern of disappearances that has persisted for decades without explanation. Searchers often abandon efforts after brief forays, deterred by steep ravines, slippery slopes, and the remote isolation that makes rescue operations perilous. Even with helicopters, ATVs, and tracking dogs, large swaths of the range are virtually inaccessible. Heavy snow, loose volcanic rock, and dense forest cover create natural barriers that cannot be overcome without significant risk. In some cases, the very act of entering certain valleys or ridges seems to trigger confusion, forcing teams to retreat before meaningful progress is made, reinforcing the region's reputation as a place where human intervention is limited. Ravines hidden beneath dense underbrush and marshy flats challenge both foot travel and aerial reconnaissance, creating natural traps that frustrate attempts to map the terrain. Moss-covered logs conceal sudden drops, while underground springs and boggy soils can swallow boots, packs, and sometimes small vehicles. Even when GPS devices function, the forest canopy distorts signals, creating false readings that complicate navigation. Rescuers must continuously reassess the environment, yet despite careful preparation, these concealed hazards have contributed to multiple aborted missions and lost searchers. Seasonal extremes amplify the danger, with snow accumulating unexpectedly, temperatures dropping below freezing, and fog rising unpredictably from the valleys. Spring thaws can destabilize slopes overnight, while autumn storms bring sudden downpours that render trails and ravines impassable. Even the summer months are not entirely safe. Temperatures fluctuate drastically between sunlit slopes and shaded gullies, producing ice patches and slick mud. Late autumn rains can turn moss and soil into treacherous mudslides, while winter snows often block previously safe paths within hours. These conditions have caused experienced search teams to reconsider their approaches and often limit operations to brief daylight windows. Animals move with eerie caution through the forests, and locals note that their behaviour sometimes shifts abruptly when humans enter certain zones. Wolves and bears are present, but are rarely aggressive toward humans. Rather, their sudden absence or uncharacteristic movement can unsettle teams. Birds often fall silent without warning, and the usual rustle of small mammals can cease entirely for minutes at a time. Elk or deer may vanish suddenly, leaving no tracks, and insects behave in unusually dense swarms in some areas. While these patterns are not fully understood, they contribute to a growing sense among researchers that the environment itself behaves unpredictably in areas associated with vanishings. Teams report that prolonged exposure produces confusion, fatigue, and a creeping sense of disorientation, leaving rescuers unable to reliably retrace their steps. Days spent navigating steep slopes and thick forest under constant vigilance against hazards take a psychological toll. Several reports mention searchers seeing fleeting figures or shadows that vanish when approached, or perceiving sounds that cannot be located. Some teams have noted a distorted sense of time, where hours can feel like minutes or vice versa. The cumulative effect of isolation, physical strain, and environmental uncertainty increases the likelihood of errors, leading teams to limit the scope and duration of their operations. Patterns observed across multiple incidents reveal strange consistencies. Missing individuals appear displaced far from last known positions, and gear is occasionally found arranged deliberately. Backpacks are sometimes upright, ropes coiled neatly, and clothing draped over branches. In one instance, a set of hiking poles was found aligned toward a distant ridge, with no discernible path to connect them to the hiker's last location. Such findings defy simple explanation and have led authorities to classify these areas as high-risk zones, where traditional search methods are unreliable. Analysis of survivor accounts suggests that even experienced hikers are vulnerable to subtle environmental cues that may direct them unintentionally into areas from which they cannot return. Scientific surveys highlight unstable soil, hidden sinkholes, and fractured rock formations, yet none can account for the anomalous disappearances reported in official logs. Geologists note the prevalence of fractured basalt and compacted volcanic soil, which can conceal sudden collapses or crevices. Meteorological studies show rapid temperature swings and frequent low-lying fogs, while hydrologists document complex underground water flows that complicate surface navigation. Even with these verifiable hazards considered, the pattern of disappearances persists, suggesting that known environmental dangers are only part of the explanation. Additional survey data indicate localized magnetic anomalies in certain ridges, though the effect on human navigation remains unclear, adding another layer of complexity to the search efforts. Vast tracts of the Khamar-Daban remain unmapped and inaccessible, their secrets preserved by forests and ridges that no human expedition has fully penetrated. Satellite imagery reveals gaps in coverage, and local guides speak of areas avoided even by logging crews due to terrain instability. Paths carved by wildlife do not necessarily correspond to human movement, and snow can erase tracks in hours. Even modern GPS mapping leaves uncertainty, and attempts to survey the entire range with drones are limited by dense canopies and sudden weather shifts. The combination of human caution, environmental unpredictability, and historical anomalies ensures that much of the range remains a domain beyond the reach of conventional search and rescue operations. Within the thick Siberian forest, the vanished linger where no searcher's eyes can reach, and the mountains keep their secrets unbroken.